Chapter 269. How smart was Matsumoto Takeyoshi? After hearing In-chan Dashyong's words, he immediately understood his intentions. Other than the 9 Monster 10 guards, the only one that could see Great God Sietion was him, Matsumoto Takeyoshi. If he helped In-chan Dashyong claim credit, Great God Sietion would definitely heavily reward In-chan Dashyong. Perhaps he might even be given the title of 10th Monster. Once he was given the title of Monster King, not to mention his status, he could also receive Great God Sietion's personal guidance. His cultivation would reach a new level, and it could be considered both fame and fortune. The smiling Matsumoto Takeyoshi did not ask why In-chan Dashyong wanted to steal Fujiwara no Chiko's soul. However, even if In-chan Dashyong did not say anything, he could guess most of it. It was very simple. This In-chan Dashyong wanted the 2 peerless divine weapons in Yifan's hands and the beautiful Fujiwara no Chiko. This gecko demon never expected that Yifan would force the heaven-defying Dai Tengu out of the Jadeite throne. He never expected that Dai Tengu would actually keep his word after being forced out of the Jadeite throne, giving up the perfect opportunity to kill Yifan. In order to obtain the peerless divine weapons and beauty, he first used his evil techniques to steal Fujiwara no Chiko's soul. Then he was prepared to use this to force Yifan to hand over the divine weapons. Since Yifan loved his wife so much, he would definitely hand over the 2 divine weapons in his hands to save his wife's life. In that case, Yifan would lose all of his spiritual power and the divine weapons would leave his hands. How could he be Bear Rinchuan's opponent? At that time, Bear Rinchuan, who had the divine weapons in his hands, could kill Yifan as easily as stepping on an ant. With great merit, the divine weapons in his hands, and the beauty in his arms, Bear Rinchuan's calculations were really good. It was a pity that a single barrier had ruined his dreams. He did not obtain the divine weapons, and only obtained a soul without a physical body. But luckily, Yifan was finally dead. This was more important than anything else. Mr. Ursa, don't worry. The throne of the 10th Demon King belongs to you. Matsumoto Takeyoshi smiled and raised his wine glass to toast In-chan Dashyong. Let me congratulate Mr. Ursa first. Ha ha ha. In-chan Dashyong laughed and raised his wine glass. Thank you for your auspicious words. Cheers. Cheers. Ha ha ha. After the 2 drank their wine, they looked at each other and laughed. In-chan Dashyong had obtained the throne of the Demon King, and Matsumoto Takeyoshi had gotten rid of a big problem in his heart. The 2 of them had different goals, and each took what they needed. Whoosh! Just as the 2 of them were laughing, the huge warship suddenly began to shake violently. Creak, creak! The oil chandelier above them swayed back and forth. What's going on? Matsumoto Takeyoshi, who had steadied himself, asked with a frown. My lord! A ninja's voice came from outside the door. The wind is blowing outside. The wind is blowing? Matsumoto Takeyoshi frowned. It was calm just a moment ago. Why did the wind suddenly blow? Could it be? Matsumoto Takeyoshi's expression began to turn ugly. He suddenly remembered the scene at the wedding at the Zhou residence. Before Yifan appeared, a strange gust of wind blew past and flipped all the wine tables over. He later heard from the green-clothed man that the gust of wind was caused by Yifan's movement technique. Could be him this time, too. Matsumoto Takeyoshi felt a faint sense of uneasiness in his heart. I'll go out and take a look, the green-clothed man said as he walked towards the cabin exit and reached out to open the door. Whoosh! The moment the cabin door opened, a strong gust of wind whistled in. Clang! The wooden table was flipped over by this gust of wind. Crash! The wine and dishes on the table instantly fell to the ground. It was a mess. The cabin was instantly in a mess. Matsumoto Takeyoshi was unable to open his eyes because of this gust of wind. He hurriedly covered his eyes with his sleeves. Bang! The green-clothed man at the cabin door immediately closed it. Then, he turned around and said with an ashen face, Quickly find something to hold on to. A big wave is coming. After he finished speaking, he immediately used his movement technique and quickly arrived in front of Matsumoto Takeyoshi. He pressed down on the stunned, Matsumoto Takeyoshi. Wah! The sound of a huge wave came. Bang! The huge wave solidly hit the warship. A thunderous boom resounded. Boom! The warship was violently tilted by this huge wave and shook violently. Pa! The butter lamp on the ceiling of the cabin couldn't withstand the violent shaking and fell down. The floor instantly turned into a sea of fire. Chua! The green-clothed man who was pressing down on Matsumoto Takeyoshi's shoulder flicked his sleeves, and the sea of fire was instantly extinguished. Inchan Daishion and the veiled white envoy did not panic because of their cultivation. They remained motionless in their original positions. Creak! The tilted warship began to gradually reset. Wah! The seawater on the warship fell back into the sea. This warship was specially strengthened. The entire warship was not only waterproof and fireproof, but its sturdiness was also strengthened to the extreme. The steel keel, sturdy and thick deck, wide hull, and excellent equipment. The configuration of this warship was comparable to Tokugawa Ieyasu's Sakura. But even so, this warship was almost capsized by this huge wave. After the huge wave, it was calm and peaceful. Matsumoto Takeyoshi frowned. He was afraid of the calm after the huge wave. Not only him, even the green-clothed and white-clothed envoys who were standing behind him had a change in expression. If that huge wave had been blown by the sea breeze, it would not have been so quiet now. Inchan Daishion saw the serious expression on the three envoys' faces and felt somewhat puzzled. Just a huge wave scared them to this extent? It was understandable that Matsumoto Takeyoshi did not have cultivation. But the famous green-clothed and white-clothed envoys should not be scared to this extent, right? You guys? Inchan Daishion asked the question in his heart. He's here, the green-clothed man said. Who's here? Inchan Daishion said as he brought the wine cup to his mouth and drank gracefully. Yi Fan, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a frown. Pooh! When Inchan Daishion heard Matsumoto Takeyoshi's words, he was so shocked that he spat out the wine in his mouth. When a huge wave came, he held the wine cup firmly in his hand and did not spill a single drop. But when he heard Yi Fan's name, he spat out more than half of the wine. Cough, cough, cough. Who is it? Inchan Daishion asked while coughing. He thought his ears were playing tricks on him. You didn't hear wrong. Matsumoto Takeyoshi, who had been staring blankly after the huge wave, looked up at Inchan Daishion and said quietly, Yi Fan is here. What? Inchan Daishion could not believe his ears. He's not dead. Inchan Daishion. Just as Inchan Daishion was about to laugh at the three for being overly nervous and overreacting, a familiar and resounding voice came from above. The voice was deep and resonant, echoing endlessly. Chapter 270. He's still alive. How is that possible? Inchan Daishion's expression changed drastically. Isn't he dead? I saw his wandering soul floating on the mountain peak with my own eyes. Even the black and white impermanence appeared. How could he still be alive? Could it be that the person outside is Yi Fan's ghost? Inchan Daishion frowned. Let's go out and take a look. Matsumoto Takeyoshi said as he stood up and walked slowly to the cabin door. The man in green followed closely behind. The man in white who had been silent the whole time walked at the back. Looks like you're in trouble this time. When he passed by Inchan Daishion who was frowning, the man in white said softly, Damn it. Inchan Daishion muttered to himself as he crushed the white porcelain wine cup in his hand. He then stood up and said, I don't believe that he can come back from the dead. After that, he strode out of the cabin. High up in the sky, Yi Fan, who was wearing a white robe, was floating in the air. He looked down at the battleship expressionlessly. Fujiwara no Chiko had told him the approximate location of Matsumoto Takeyoshi's battleship when she was alive. Therefore, he found a ship in less than half an hour after leaving Foming Mountain. His current cultivation had increased by more than 10 times compared to a month ago. Naturally, his movement technique was unimaginably fast. In the past, it would take him at least 2 hours to reach the East Sea from Foming Mountain's Lingyun Cave. Now it only took him 10 minutes. That monstrous wave just now, was caused by the gale that was stirred up when he used his movement technique. One could only imagine how fast it was. On the deck of the ship, the 5 boys of Japan, Onijiro, Fujiwara gang, and the rest of the 13 masters stood there quietly, looking up at the uninvited guest in the sky. Among the 13 masters, other than the man in blue, Kawara Sato, no one recognized the young man in front of them. However, even so, none of them dared to let their guard down. They were all top-notch experts in Japan. With a single glance, they could tell that the newcomer was a peerless cultivator. This person was dressed in a blue robe with a carefree scarf on his head. A silver snake soft sword was tied to his waist, and he held a fierce divine weapon in his hand. His face was as beautiful as jade, and his hair was as white as snow. His eyes were like cold stars, and between his brows there was a murderous aura. On the deck of the ship, the man in blue, Sato Akutagawa, frowned. The scene in the cave flashed before his eyes again. Recalling the scene of him being humiliated, the blue-clothed man clenched his ghost flame saber so tightly that it creaked. What a handsome little brother. Among the 5 boys of Japan, Mochizuki Kumi, who was dressed in red and had a hot figure, waved the fan in her hand. She looked at Yi Fan in the air with a charming smile and said, "I didn't expect there to be such a handsome man in the great Ming dynasty." "What's wrong, Miss Kumi? Have you taken a fancy to him?" Onijiro, who was wearing a green robe and had a handsome face, looked at Mochizuki Kumi with a smile. Mochizuki Kumi covered her mouth with her fan and giggled softly. What woman wouldn't be tempted by such a handsome man? Do you know who he is? Matsumoto Takeyoshi said as he walked out of the cabin. Behind him were the blue and white emissaries and Inchandashion. Seeing Matsumoto Takeyoshi come out, the experts immediately bowed their heads and greeted him. "He is Yi Fan," Matsumoto Takeyoshi said softly as he looked at Yi Fan, who was floating in the air. Once he said that, everyone except the blue-clothed man, Sato Akutagawa, could not help but be shocked. This young man was that Yi Fan who used only 3 days to turn from an ordinary person into a top-notch expert. He was the one who defeated Hattori Kianxio, an elder of the martial arts world. Looking at Yi Fan, who had a head of silver hair and a murderous aura, Matsumoto Takeyoshi could not help but sigh. This Yi Fan was like the legendary phoenix. Every time he was on the verge of death, he would be reborn from the ashes and become stronger the more he fought. Great God Xietian was right. This person was destined to be their mortal enemy. Behind Matsumoto Takeyoshi, the blue and white emissaries were shocked when they saw Yi Fan's appearance. Yi Fan in front of them was soaked in spirit energy and emitted a faint white light. His eyes were filled with spirit energy, and there were faint flashes of 5 colors. All of this proved one thing. The current Yi Fan was completely different from the Yi Fan in the Zhou residence. The blue emissary frowned. The white emissary had a serious expression. The speed at which Yi Fan's cultivation improved had completely exceeded their imagination. The one who was most shocked was Inchandashion. If he had not seen this scene with his own eyes, he would not have believed it even if he was beaten to death. The cultivation of a Yi Fan in front of him was so high and his spirit energy was so strong that the stunned Inchandashion could not help but think that it was impossible. Who would have thought that a person who had completely exhausted his spirit energy, suffered a fatal injury, and had his soul separated from his body could recover to his original state and increase his cultivation in just a month? Inchandashion. In the sky, Yi Fan spoke with a murderous expression. "Where is my wife's soul?" Hey. On the deck, Inchandashion took a step forward and looked up at Yi Fan with a smile. "That little girl's soul is in my hands. How about it?" Although Yi Fan's cultivation had increased, Inchandashion was not worried. This was Matsumoto Takeyoshi's territory. There were 13 peak experts, the blue and white emissaries, and himself who had recovered his spirit energy. No matter how strong Yi Fan was, it was impossible for him to fight against so many experts. Moreover, Fujiwara no Chico's soul was still in his hands. This Yi Fan wanted to save his wife, so naturally he would not dare do anything to him. With the trump card in hand, Inchan Daxiong thought of this, and his heart fell to the ground. Swoosh! As soon as Inchan Daxiong finished speaking, Yifan flipped his left hand and bent his 5 fingers slightly, turning his palm into a claw. A tyrannical and invisible suction force instantly pulled Inchan Daxiong, who was dozens of feet away from the deck. Inchan Daxiong only felt a huge force suddenly attack him. He was immediately suppressed by this invisible force and couldn't move at all. By the time he realized what was going on, he was already in the air. At this time, he was less than 10 feet away from Yifan. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. When the experts on the deck saw this, they were so shocked that they sucked in a breath of cold air. The green-clothed man behind Matsumoto Takeyoshi frowned. The white-clothed man frowned slightly and looked at Yifan in the air. What kind of sorcery is this? Inchan Daxiong, who was firmly suppressed in the air, was frightened and began to stutter. The force that was suppressing him was definitely not spirit energy. If it was spirit energy, it would not be able to trap him. Instead, it would increase his spirit energy. How could he be unable to move? Where's my wife's soul? Yifan calmly asked as he exerted more strength in his hand. Inchan Daxiong's figure slowly approached Yifan. At the same time, he began to feel his breathing quicken and he was somewhat out of breath. Chapter 271. Spiritual Energy. The short green-eyed boy in a gray robe frowned and turned to Kamehameha. Mr. Kamehameha, you're not joking, right? You should know that Inchan Daxiong is best at absorbing his opponent's spiritual energy. You're right. The knowledgeable Kamehameha took a step forward with a brown wooden cane in his hand and said, Inchan Daxiong is indeed good at absorbing his opponent's spiritual energy. However, the moves this young man is using are definitely not as simple as spiritual energy. Oh, the green-eyed boy frowned and asked, please enlighten me. According to this old man's knowledge, once this spiritual energy is cultivated to a certain realm, one can use chi to control chi. Kamehameha stroked his long beard. After cultivating to this realm, one doesn't need to release their spiritual energy outside their body to resonate with the air outside and be used by them. Using chi to control chi. The green-eyed boy had a look of disbelief after hearing Kamehameha's words. This was the first time he had heard of this realm. That's right. Kamehameha looked at the cold-faced Yifan in the air and said solemnly, this old man has roamed Japan for decades and met no less than hundreds of experts. However, I have never seen someone whose spiritual energy cultivation has reached such a realm. The heavens have eyes. I didn't think that I would be able to see it with my own eyes as soon as I arrived in the Great Ming Dynasty. It said that the Great Ming Dynasty has hidden dragons and crouching tigers. It's true. The green-eyed boy frowned and looked up into the sky, no longer speaking. Ever since he came to the Great Ming Dynasty, every expert he met left a deep impression on him. First, it was the 5 elements experts of Lihua Palace, Jin Shan, Mu Sun, and Xue Ling. Then, it was this legendary young man in front of him, the eldest son and eldest grandson of the Divine Weapon Clan, Yifan. Mr. Matsumoto, should we help? The green-clothed man behind Matsumoto Takeyoshi asked. No need. Matsumoto Takeyoshi smiled and shook his head. The man in black no longer spoke. He had already understood what Matsumoto Takeyoshi meant. The matter of forcibly capturing Fujiwara no Chico's soul was done by Inchan Daxiong from the beginning to the end. It had nothing to do with them. Matsumoto Takeyoshi wanted to take this opportunity to let the experts see Yifan's cultivation with their own eyes. To him, Inchan Daxiong was just a pawn. Even if he was killed by Yifan, he could only blame himself. He could not blame anyone else. Speaking of which, Matsumoto Takeyoshi would definitely want Yifan to kill Inchan Daxiong. The reason was simple. Once Inchan Daxiong died, it would definitely alarm the East Ocean Demon Realm. If Great God Xietian knew that Yifan had killed his subordinate, he would definitely not sit idly by. He would definitely send an even stronger expert to deal with Yifan. This way, he would not have to worry about Yifan's problem. He could also focus on finding the 9 cauldrons protector. Looking at the current situation, Inchan Daxiong's life would be in danger this time. The green-clothed man thought to himself. High up in the sky, Inchan Daxiong felt that it was getting more and more difficult to breathe. At this moment, his face had already turned the color of pig liver. His figure was already less than 3 meters away from Yifan. Under the heavy pressure, he could only exhale and not inhale. The reason was simple. Yifan had already used the qi controlling technique to expel all the air within 3 meters of Inchan Daxiong. Inchan Daxiong, who was filled with confidence earlier, never would have thought that Yifan's cultivation would have reached such a level. Even now, he did not understand what kind of power was suppressing him to the point where he could not move at all. He even lost his ability to breathe. Up until now, he had not made a single move. Instead, he was firmly suppressed by his opponent in the blink of an eye. Inchan Daxiong was a little angry. No matter what, he was still a famous character in the East Ocean Demon Realm. Today, he was actually captured by this pretty boy in front of so many experts. This time, he had lost all his face. He used all his strength to circulate the spiritual energy in his body, wanting to break free from Yifan's imprisonment. Under his full strength, his entire body began to emit a dazzling light. Even so, the power that was suppressing him did not decrease in the slightest. Even if he circulated his inner core to the limit, it was still useless. Activating the inner core itself consumed a lot of spiritual energy. Now that he could no longer breathe and forcefully activating the inner core failed, Inchan Daxiong completely gave up. He could not understand what this pretty boy in front of him had experienced. Not only did he not die, he even came back from the dead and had his cultivation level skyrocketed. What made him even angrier was that when he was in such a predicament, none of the experts on the warship helped him. They were all just watching the show. What a sinister Matsumoto Takeyoshi. Inchan Daxiong understood that the experts below did not help because they did not have Matsumoto Takeyoshi's orders. Burning the bridge after crossing the river, Inchan Daxiong suddenly remembered a sentence from Sun Tzu's Art of War. Hand over Chico's soul. Yifan's eyes were filled with spiritual energy as he stared fixedly at Inchan Daxiong. Inchan Daxiong could no longer speak. He could only open his mouth and let out painful cries. Yifan's cold expression loosened his grip. He was afraid that Inchan Daxiong would suffocate to death before he could hand over his beloved wife's soul. Yifan loosened his grip, allowing the air to flow freely. Only then did Inchan Daxiong not die. Cough, 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 cough. Inchan Daxiong coughed violently as he greedily took in large mouthfuls of air. Speak. Yifan roared as he tightened his grip again. Inchan Daxiong was once again unable to move. In the soul, gather, cauldron. Inchan Daxiong stuttered. Soul gather cauldron? The evil cauldron filled with demons that Brother Kim had mentioned before? This bastard actually placed Chico's soul in that evil cauldron. Yifan was enraged when he heard this news. Where is the soul gather cauldron? Yifan roared. His deep voice reverberated through the sky and echoed endlessly. Dongying. Inchan Daxiong was barely breathing as he started to roll his eyes. You could die now. Yifan, with his silver hair fluttering in the wind, roared as he bent his left hand into a claw and stabbed it into Inchan Daxiong's chest. Poochie. Blood splattered everywhere. Yifan's left hand stabbed straight into Inchan Daxiong's chest. Inchan Daxiong instantly let out a blood-curdling scream. His pair of brown eyes were wide open. He originally thought that with so many experts present, they would be able to kill Yifan with their combined strength. Even if they couldn't kill him, they would at least be able to severely injure him again. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he would never have thought that his life was worthless in the eyes of Matsumoto Takeyoshi. Guji, Guji. Yifan, with an evil smile, stared into Inchan Daxiong's eyes as he slowly pulled out his blood-stained arm. Inchan Daxiong's facial muscles started to twitch nonstop. His entire body started to tremble as well. Guji, Guji. As Yi Fan slowly pulled out his arm, dozens of red lights shot out from Yi Fan's bloodstained hand. Chapter 272. What a cruel method. The experts on the deck couldn't help but frown when they saw this scene. Any one of these people was a top-notch expert, and the number of people who had died at their hands could be said to be countless. Even so, such a tragic method in front of them still made them slightly raise their eyebrows. Even the man in blue, Akira Sato, who was known for his ruthlessness, couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He suddenly felt very lucky. If that Yi Fan was as ruthless as he was now, he would have lost his life a long time ago. Mochizuki Kumi, who had just praised Yi Fan's handsomeness, turned pale. She didn't expect such a handsome young man to be so vicious. It was said that beautiful women were like snakes and scorpions, but this pretty boy in front of her was even more vicious than snakes and scorpions. The man in blue clenched his fists, and the man in white frowned. Matsumoto Takeyoshi just smiled and didn't say a word. The atmosphere was terrifyingly quiet. In midair, Inchan Dashion watched as Yi Fan forcibly took his inner core, and his pupils suddenly dilated. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his head tilted to the side. He was no longer alive. Wah! As soon as the inner core was taken away, Inchan Dashion's original form was revealed. From a middle-aged man in a brown robe, he turned into a huge gecko that was more than 100 feet long. Yi Fan looked at the dead gecko in front of him, and the corner of his mouth curled up. He released the strength in his hand. Plop! The gecko's huge corpse fell from the sky and into the sea, causing a large splash. Yi Fan smiled evilly and opened his palm. In the middle of his palm, a red bead the size of a walnut could be seen. It was shining brightly, and spiritual energy was swirling around it. If he gave this inner core to Xiao Zhao, she might be able to regain her human form. Yi Fan thought to himself as he put the Niden back into his pocket. He then stared at Matsumoto Takeyoshi with an evil smile. At this moment, Yi Fan, who was floating in the air, had his long silver hair fluttering in the wind. Coupled with the crescent moon in Yi Kong's hand and his demonic smile, he was like an evil god descending upon the world. Matsumoto Takeyoshi, dressed in a gray robe, had a calm expression on his face. With his hands behind his back, he smiled at Yi Fan. Behind him, the green and white envoys had cold expressions. They were ready to protect Matsumoto Takeyoshi at any time. Umph! Yi Fan coldly snorted in midair and said to Matsumoto Takeyoshi, "I have no interest in taking your life now. I will remember your life for now. In the future, Chico will personally take your head." "Okay," Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a smile on the deck. "I will wait for you. Before that, you better not die," Yi Fan said coldly as he stared at Matsumoto Takeyoshi. "You can rest assured," Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a smile. "I will not die before I obtain the 9 cauldrons. That would be best." A sinister smile appeared on Yi Fan's face. He looked at the green and white envoys standing behind Matsumoto Takeyoshi, then looked at the other experts on the deck. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he waved his long sleeves. Boom! The dark blue sea under Yi Fan's feet instantly surged up into the sky. Straight up into the sky. The huge water curtain was dozens of feet high and directly separated Yi Fan from the warship. Whoosh! The air waves caused by the water curtain caused Yi Fan's silver hair to soar into the sky and dance in the wind. Swoosh! The green-clothed man standing behind Matsumoto Takeyoshi was afraid that Yi Fan would hurt Matsumoto Takeyoshi. He immediately flipped his palm, and a green ball of light appeared in his hand. Buzz! After the green ball of light appeared, it rapidly expanded. In the blink of an eye, the green ball of light that was dozens of feet in size completely enveloped the entire warship. Whoosh! The monstrous wave quickly descended and slammed heavily onto the warship. Boom! The huge wave violently slammed into the barrier that the green-clothed man had set up on the warship. Whoosh! The seawater splashed everywhere and the waves surged. The green-clothed man's barrier blocked the seawater's attack. When they looked up into the sky again, there was no trace of Yi Fan anymore. They only saw a white light quickly sweep past Yi Kong and disappear into the sky. What a fast movement technique! When the experts saw this scene, they were all shocked. This young man's cultivation was so high that it was completely beyond their imagination. "Sir, should we inform the Japanese to make preparations?" The green-clothed man asked Matsumoto Takeyoshi as he retracted the barrier. "No need." Matsumoto Takeyoshi smiled and turned to walk back to the cabin. He seemed to be in a good mood. After the experts heard Matsumoto Takeyoshi's words, they looked at each other. They didn't know what Matsumoto Takeyoshi was planning. The green-clothed man frowned and then entered the cabin with the white-clothed man. The remaining 13 experts also returned to their cabins in twos and threes. Only 2 people remained on the deck, Shinkong Iha and Onijiro. The 2 of them stood in front of the warship's railing and didn't speak for a long time. The sea breeze blew on their bodies, causing their robes to flutter. "Mr. Onijiro." Shinkong Iha was the first to break the silence. "What do you think of Yi Fan?" "Evil." Onijiro, who was dressed in a black robe and had a handsome face, looked at the sparkling sea in front of him and said calmly. Shinkong Iha smiled and didn't say anything. "I'm sure Mr. Onijiro has already seen through it. Why ask me?" Onijiro said as he glanced at Shinkong Iha. Among the 13 experts, only Shinkong Iha didn't have shadow. Even a fool could see that Shinkong Iha wasn't human. Onijiro, who had a profound cultivation base, could see at a glance that although Shinkong Iha was ranked last among the 5, his cultivation base was so high that the other 4 couldn't compare to him. "Mr. Onijiro, what are you saying?" Shinkong Iha said with a smile. "I saw that you were observing Yi Fan, so I asked for your opinion." "What do you think, Mr. Onijiro?" Onijiro asked Shinkong Iha. "Mr. Onijiro is right," Shinkong Iha said. "Although this person has a peerless cultivation base, his evil aura is overwhelming. I'm afraid that half of his spiritual altar has already been corroded by the evil aura in his body." "That's right." Onijiro nodded and said, "The spirit aura in his body is extremely complicated. According to my observation, there's a consciousness hidden in his spiritual altar. It's neither evil nor righteous. It's both righteous and evil," Shinkong has said. "This person will definitely not be an ordinary person in the future," Onijiro said with a serious expression. "We have to be careful." "Of course," Shinkong has said and changed the topic. "Mr. Onijiro, do you know of Eldritch?" "Eldritch?" Onijiro frowned. "Is he the legendary peerless expert in the Central Plains?" "Don't you know?" Shinkong has said with a smile. "Yi Fan is the reincarnation of Eldritch." Onijiro was shocked when he heard Shinkong Iha's words. Then he frowned. "No wonder. There's something I'd like to ask Mr. Onijiro." Shinkong Iha asked Onijiro, "Are Yi Fan and Mr. Matsumoto really destined to be enemies?" Chapter 273. Ominous Star? There are 3 of them? Shinkong Iha frowned after hearing Onijiro's words. "That many. Before I came to the Great Ming Dynasty, I did a divination." Onijiro calmly looked at the sparkling sea and lightly said, "This trip to the Great Ming Dynasty will be a mixed blessing." "Mr. Oniguchi means," Shinkong Iha said with a frown. "I'll do my best and leave it to fate," Onijiro said indifferently. Shinkong Iha's frown became even tighter. In the cabin, Matsumoto Takeyoshi was smiling as he poured himself a drink. It was obvious that he was very happy. "Mr. Matsumoto, why are you so happy?" The man in green asked with a frown. "It can be said that the heavens are helping me today," Matsumoto Takeyoshi said as he raised his head and drank the sake in the white porcelain cup in one gulp. The man in green had a face full of doubt. Enchantment was killed and died tragically on the spot. Yi Fan came back from the dead, and his cultivation increased dramatically. He didn't see anything to be happy about. "Let me ask you, who killed Enchantment? Where's Yi Fan now?" Matsumoto Takeyoshi asked the man in green with a smile. "Of course Enchantment was killed by Yi Fan." The man in green replied. "As for Yi Fan, He must be on his way to the East Ocean continent. That's right. That's why I'm happy, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said as he continued to pour wine into his cup. Although Inchan Dashiong isn't one of the 9 demons' 10 guards, he's still a tiger general. Once he dies, Great God Xietian will definitely not let this matter rest. He'll definitely send experts to kill Yifan. If Yifan goes to Japan now, it's tantamount to sending a lamb to the tiger's den. The azure-clothed man gave a slight nod. Xietian's 9 beasts and 10 guards were not a joke. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that these 19 experts had heaven-defying cultivations. Although the current Yifan's cultivation was no longer the same as before, as the saying goes, a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake, and a good tiger cannot withstand a pack of wolves. The Eastern Ocean continent was Great God Xietian's territory, so no matter what, Yifan would not be able to defeat the 9 demons' 10 guards, let alone Great God Xietian. However, the azure-clothed man suddenly thought of a problem. If Yifan doesn't fight and directly goes to the Sunset Autumn Manor to steal the soul-gathering cauldron, that would be even better, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a smile. Oh, the azure-clothed man was confused. The soul-gathering cauldron has my blood seal, so other than me, no one can open it. Matsumoto Takeyoshi smiled as he drank the sake. The azure-clothed man suddenly understood. If my guess isn't wrong, in a few days, Yifan will bring the soul-gathering cauldron here to find me, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a smile. At that time, he'll be obedient. Such a brilliant method. The azure-clothed man finally understood why Matsumoto Takeyoshi was so happy. Yifan was eager to save his wife, so even if he could avoid the 9 demons' 10 guards, he would definitely bring the soul-gathering cauldron to find Matsumoto Takeyoshi. However, other than Matsumoto Takeyoshi, no one else could open the evil cauldron. At that time, Matsumoto Takeyoshi would use it to threaten Yifan, and he would listen to him. He would do whatever Matsumoto Takeyoshi asked him to do. It was a pity for the ninjas of the Sunset Autumn Manor. The azure-clothed man thought. If Yifan took the soul-gathering cauldron, the ninjas guarding the evil cauldron would definitely die on the spot. Good wine, Matsumoto Takeyoshi said with a smile after drinking several cups. Above the clouds, Yifan, dressed in a white robe, was flying towards Dongying at high speed. He had to get the soul-gathering cauldron as soon as possible. There were so many demons in the soul-gathering cauldron that Fujiwara no Chico soul would definitely be in danger. Thinking about how his beloved wife's soul was suffering right now, the silver-haired Yifan's heart ached. He suddenly pushed his movement technique to the maximum. At this time, his spirit chi cultivation had already reached the earth-shattering realm. It was 10 times the spirit chi cultivation of skyrocketing realm. Swoosh! Under the urging of the powerful spirit chi, Yifan's body instantly turned into a white light and streaked across the sky like a shooting star. Bang! 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 Yifan's speed was so fast that it formed 3 circular shockwaves in the sky. With his full strength, he used less than half an hour to arrive above the East Sea. However, at this time, who was concentrating on flying at full speed, sharply felt that above the sea below him, someone with an extremely high cultivation level was observing him. Even an ordinary person would feel if they were being stared at, let alone Yifan, whose cultivation level was much higher than before. The distance between the clouds and the sea was more than 10,000 feet. It was also late at night. Under such circumstances, someone who could observe Yifan clearly was definitely not simple. There was an expert here. As Yifan thought about it, he immediately lowered his head and looked down. At this time, Yifan's 5 senses were 10 times stronger than before. Even though he was 10,000 feet high in the sky, he could still see everything on the ground clearly. Through the thin layer of clouds, Yifan could clearly see everything below him. Above the turbulent sea, an extremely large warship was currently breaking through the waves and advancing forward. On the deck of the ship, a middle-aged man in a loose white robe stood there with his hands behind his back. He was looking up at him with a frown. The man was tall and handsome. His eyes were very sharp. At first glance, one could tell that he was a first-class expert. This person was none other than Yagyu Ryanosuk, who was rushing to the great Ming dynasty. That night, after meditating in the cabin, he came to the deck of the ship to get some fresh air. However, he did not expect to find a brilliant light ball cutting through Yikong. It came from afar and approached him quickly, with a long tail behind it. At first, he thought it was a meteor, so he did not pay much attention to it. However, with his meticulous mind and profound cultivation level, he soon found that it was not a meteor at all. There were 3 reasons for this. Firstly, although meteors would leave a long trail behind them, they were usually fleeting and could not be seen in the blink of an eye. Secondly, no matter how fast a meteor was, its height would gradually decrease, and it would also emit a rumbling sound. Thirdly, the light emitted by meteors was mostly orange, similar to the color of flames. Furthermore, the size of the light would gradually change during the process of falling. However, the light in front of him was completely different from a meteor. The tail of this light was very stable, maintaining a long tail of more than 30 feet. The color of the light was pure white and shining. It did not have the color and roar of a meteor. What was even more incredible was that the height and speed of this light remained the same. This was a cultivation expert traveling at night. Long Jijia was shocked. He frowned and immediately used his eyesight to take a closer look. With a single glance, he was immediately taken aback. Sure enough, as he expected, in the light above the clouds, a handsome and heroic young man was flying in the air while staring at him. When their eyes met, both of them were shocked by the other's cultivation level. Chapter 274. Above the clouds, Yifan's eyesight had greatly improved after he reached the earth-shattering realm. He could see the cultivation level of the other party at a glance. The middle-aged man on the warship was surrounded by auspicious air and spiritual power. On his right arm, a black dragon pattern raised its head and wagged its tail. He was majestic without being angry. The middle-aged man's entire body was emitting a domineering black spiritual power, like a ball of black flames burning fiercely. Yagyu Ryuk was the reincarnation of the black dragon under the Amaterasu god. His cultivation level was exquisite, so he could naturally see that the young man above the clouds was not simple. This person seemed to be only about 20 years old. He was dressed in Ming Dynasty clothes, had a head of long silver hair, and had an overbearing and exquisite spiritual power. Even he, the reincarnation of the black dragon, was amazed after seeing it. This young man's body was full of 5-colored spiritual power, and even his bones had been completely soaked in spiritual power. His cultivation level was incredible. What shocked Yagyu Ryuk even more was the 2 peerless divine weapons on this person's body. Although the sword in his hand was not unsheathed, it still emitted a shocking red flame and radiated heat. The soft sword that was coiled around this person's waist was shining with a white light and emitting a cold aura. Although it seemed to be sealed by some mysterious power, the cold aura it emitted was still very domineering, causing people to tremble in fear. What a peerless expert! Long Jijia, who was frowning, was secretly amazed. It was said that the great Ming dynasty was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Now it seemed that the reputation was well-deserved. He had encountered such an expert before even entering the great Ming dynasty. He must be an expert sent by Matsumoto Takeyoshi. Yifan, who was high in the sky, looked at Long Jijia, who was frowning on the warship, and thought to himself, this person's warship was similar to Matsumoto Takeyoshi's warship, and his clothes were also Japanese. Now, that Matsumoto Takeyoshi was surrounded by experts, the person on the warship below should have come to the great Ming dynasty to support Matsumoto Takeyoshi. He did not know which Japanese expert had such an overbearing cultivation level. Who cared who he was? Chico's soul was the most important. As for who the 9 cauldrons fell into and who became the master of the great Ming dynasty, he could not be bothered to care about these things. It had nothing to do with him. Yifan thought as he shifted his gaze away from Long Jijia. He looked ahead and focused on rushing through the clouds. All of this happened in a flash. In the blink of an eye, Yi Fan had left Long Jijia's line of sight. Long Jijia's face was solemn as he slowly walked into the cabin. Inside the cabin, Huiko was Long Jijia's bed. Seeing Long Jijia come in, Yamada Keiko quickly poured a cup of freshly brewed tea and handed it to Long Jijia. How long until we reach the great Ming dynasty? Long Jijia took the tea and asked. If there is no change in the weather, we can reach the great Ming dynasty in at least 3 days, and at most 5 days, Yamada Huizi said, is the CC Ming Ming. We're now in the waters of the great Ming dynasty. We shouldn't be far from Matsumoto Takayoshi's ship, Long Jijia said as he sipped his tea. Give the order later. Pay close attention to the movements of the Wuji. Inform me as soon as there's any news. Okay. Huiko nodded. You'll see your brother soon. Long Jijia put the teacup on the wooden table, then looked at Huiko, who was wearing a white kimono, and said calmly. Huiko lowered her head and did not say a word. She understood Long Jijia's words. Her brother Yamada Shingo was Matsumoto Takayoshi's man, and she was Tokugawa Ieyasu's man. Although the two of them were brother and sister, they were now serving different masters. Once they met, she did not know what would happen. After you see your brother, don't follow me, Long Jijia said calmly. Just follow your brother. Huiko suddenly raised her head, her face full of shock. As for your parents, I'll find a way to save them, Long Jijia continued. Don't worry. Why? Huiko widened her beautiful eyes and asked in shock. Tokugawa Ieyasu is too suspicious. You won't have a good ending if you follow him, Long Jijia said as he extended his hand to the sword rack not far away. Whoosh! The black dragon katana on the sword rack flew into Long Jijia's hand. Yamada Keiko listened quietly. Although your brother Yamada Shingo is Matsumoto Takayoshi's man, he's still your brother. Blood is thicker than water, Long Jijia said slowly. You'll be safer if you follow him. My brother is Matsumoto Takayoshi's man. Sir, will you kill him? Huiko said the words that had been in her heart. Long Jijia did not answer. He just drank his tea quietly. Sir, Huiko said softly. I don't know, Long Jijia replied. Huiko pursed her lips and bit her lower lip. If he really fights with me, will you help him? Long Jijia asked Huiko. Huiko shook her head. Oh, Huiko shook her head, which surprised Long Jijia. Will you help me? Huiko still shook her head. If the two of us really fight, one of us will definitely die. Long Jijia said lightly as he lowered his head and slowly pulled out the black dragon katana from its sheath. Buzz! The katana was unsheathed. It shone brilliantly like frost and snow. The spacious cabin was suddenly filled with light. The katana was 4 feet long and shone like frost and snow. On the blade, a black dragon was wrapped around it. Its eyes were wide open and it was lifelike. After the katana was unsheathed, an extremely strong, killing intent quickly spread in all directions. The expressionless Long Jijia took out a clean white handkerchief from his bosom and slowly wiped the blade. Sir, Huiko Yamada knelt down in front of Long Jijia. Please spare my brother's life. The matter between your brother and me is a matter between men. Long Jijia glanced at Huiko Yamada, who was kneeling there, and then continued to wipe the shiny katana in his hand. It has nothing to do with you. Sir, Huiko Yamada kowtowed to the ground. Please, your brother's cultivation is extremely high. Maybe he can kill me, Long Jijia said as he carefully looked at the black dragon katana in his hand. Even if I die, I won't let him hurt you, Huiko Yamada whispered as she knelt on the ground. Huiko Yamada's words made Long Jijia frown and stop what he was doing. Buzz! After slowly returning the katana to its sheath, Long Jijia frowned and looked at Huiko Yamada kneeling in front of him. What do you mean by what you just said? Long Jijia asked. One of you is my brother, and the other is my great benefactor. Huiko Yamada, who was kneeling on the ground, straightened up. I don't want any of you to be hurt. Huiko Yamada's eyes began to redden as she spoke. Well, I promise you, Long Jijia said with a frown. If we fight one day, I will spare his life. Thank you, sir. Huiko Yamada kowtowed heavily. Chapter 275. Although he was eager to save his wife, he was not confused. Although Dongying was not big, it was not easy to find Matsumoto Takayoshi's mansion. The reason was very simple. It was his first time here. Although he could talk in Japanese, he did not know Dongying's language. He had thought of asking someone for directions, but he was afraid that Matsumoto Takayoshi had too many spies and would reveal his whereabouts in advance. After careful consideration, he decided to look for Fujiwara no Chiko's master, Ito Fumio. Ito Fumio was his father Yikong's best friend. He was also the master of his beloved wife. If he could get his help this time, he would be able to successfully take back his beloved wife's soul. Because Fujiwara no Chiko had told him countless times how beautiful Mount Fuji was, he quickly found this famous scenic spot. After reaching the sky of Mount Fuji, Yifan slowly withdrew his spiritual power and landed on the top of the mountain. Although it was already spring, the top of the mountain was still covered in white snow. In addition, it was late at night, and the bone-piercing cold wind whistled. After Yifan landed, he immediately used his extraordinary eyesight to look around, looking for the exquisite little wooden building that Fujiwara no Chiko had mentioned before. Not long after, the exquisite wooden building appeared in Yifan's sight. Yifan used his spiritual power and used his body movement technique. 3 feet above the ground, he quickly arrived in front of the wooden building. The wooden building was just as Fujiwara no Chiko had said. It was antique. The courtyard was surrounded by bluestones. In the courtyard, there was a pool, ancient pine trees, wooden tables, and benches. They were arranged in a picturesque manner, showing the owner's elegant taste. "Excuse me, is Mr. Ito here?" Yifan asked in stiff Japanese. Although he was eager to save his wife, this was the residence of his beloved wife's master. He could not break the rules. "Who are you?" A clear male voice sounded from behind Yifan. "Why are you looking for me?" He spoke in Japanese. Yifan's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately turned around. A middle-aged man wearing a greenish-gray robe, clogs on his feet, and a veil over his face was standing behind him. What a powerful movement technique! Yifan was secretly shocked. This Ito Fumio really lived up to his reputation. "Excuse me, sir," Yifan asked. "Are you Mr. Ito?" Yifan spoke in Chinese. The reason was simple. Ito Fumio was proficient in Chinese. Yifan did this to verify if the person was the real Ito Fumio. If this person did not understand what he was saying, then it must be a lie. The middle-aged man frowned and looked at Yifan quietly, not saying anything for a long time. "Fake," Yifan thought as he gripped the leaf fire sword in his hand. "Who are you?" the middle-aged man asked in fluent Chinese. This person knew Chinese. It shouldn't be fake. "My father is Yikong." "Do you remember him?" Yifan continued to ask. "Yikong, Mr. Yi?" The middle-aged man's eyes lit up. "Are you? I am Yifan. Yikong is my father." Yifan revealed his identity first. You are Brother Ye's child." The middle-aged man was a little surprised. This person was none other than Ito Fumio. As soon as Yifan landed on the top of Mount Fuji, Ito Fumio, who was meditating in the wooden building, sensed him. Yes. Yifan saw that the person was Fujiwara no Chiko's master, Ito Fumio, and immediately bowed. "Greetings, Mr. Ito." "Nephew, there is no need to be so polite. Please get up." Ito Fumio saw that Yifan's eyebrows were almost identical to Yikong's. He was sure that this person was Yikong's son. "Nephew, this is not the place to talk. Come in with me," Ito Fumio said. Yifan nodded slightly. The two of them entered the wooden building one after the other. After Ito Fumio lit up the lights in the room, the two of them sat down across from each other at a quaint wooden table. "Nephew, why did you suddenly come to Dongying?" Ito Fumio picked up the teapot on the table and poured tea for Yifan as he asked, "Has Brother Yikong been well? Where's Chiko? Why didn't she come back with you?" After Yifan and Fujiwara no Chiko's wedding, Ito Fumio received a letter from Yikong. At the mention of Fujiwara no Chiko, Yifan's heart was torn. "Sir, "There's something you don't know." Yi Fan frowned and said, "The Yi family has encountered a great disaster and has moved out." "Chiko-shi?" Yi Fan's eyes started to turn red, and he couldn't continue. "What happened to Chiko?" Ito Fumio saw that Yi Fan's eyes were red and immediately frowned. "What happened to Chiko?" "Chiko, she is dead," Yi Fan said with red eyes. Clang! The teapot in Ito Fumio's hand fell onto the wooden table, and the hot tea spilled all over the table. "Dead?" When Ito Fumio heard Yi Fan's words, he lost control of his emotions and asked loudly, "How did she die?" "It's all my fault." Yi Fan said as tears started to well up in his eyes. "Pa!" Ito Fumio slammed his hand on the wooden table and shouted angrily, "I asked how she died." Crash! The tea splashed everywhere, and the porcelain cup shattered. The wooden table that was more than a foot thick was instantly shattered by Ito Fumio's slap. The death of his beloved disciple made Ito Fumio, who had always been well-mannered, furious. It was in Chandashion. Yi Fan, who was crying, told Ito Fumio the whole story. "Baka!" Ito Fumio was furious when he heard Yi Fan's words. He stood up with a whoosh and took a black saber from the saber rack beside him. Then he fastened the black silk belt around his waist. "Ito-senpai," Yi Fan said as he stood up. "Where are you going?" "To the autumn twilight mansion." Ito Fumio gritted his teeth and looked at Yi Fan. "Do you want to come with me?" "Of course," Yi Fan said fiercely with red eyes. "Then come with me." Ito Fumio roared. At that moment, Ito Fumio was murderous like an Azura. He was really angry. "Okay," Yi Fan replied loudly. Swoosh! Ito Fumio, who had his combat sword strapped to his waist, did not even take the stairs. Instead, he used his movement skill on the second floor and dashed through the window. Crash! Wood chips flew everywhere, and the wooden window on the second floor was smashed. Ito Fumio, who broke through the window, used the void steps and descended from Mount Fuji. His movement skill was so fast that it was shocking. Seeing that Ito Fumio had left first, Yi Fan tapped the ground with his toes and used his movement skill to dash through the window and follow closely behind Ito Fumio. Ito Fumio, who was at the front, had red eyes and gritted his teeth. When he thought of the scene when Fujiwara no Chiko was learning from him, Ito Fumio's heart felt like it was being stabbed by needles. He, Ito Fumio, had killed people like flies ever since he became famous. He was cold and heartless and had never taken in a disciple. Fujiwara no Chiko and he were master and disciple in name, but in reality, they were like father and daughter. His beloved disciple's soul was taken away before he could avenge her. This made him unable to control his anger any longer. Chapter 276. Ito Fumio clenched his Kurohime katana tightly. Yi Fan, who was at the back, had a cold expression and did not say a word. "Chiko, wait for me," Yi Fan said in his heart. "Soon, you will come back from the dead. Wait for me." The two of them were furious, and their movements were extremely fast. In less than 10 minutes, they had already arrived in front of the Muchio mansion. At this moment, the Muchio mansion was completely silent. In front of the huge iron gate, two masked ninjas stood motionless on both sides. Ito Fumio and Yi Fan stopped in front of the iron gate. The two of them stood side by side and did not say a word. "Who are you?" The two ninjas standing at the door saw the murderous aura from the two of them and immediately asked vigilantly, "Wang?" The angry Ito Fumio did not answer. Instead, he slowly pulled out Kurohime from his waist. White light, a dazzling white light. When Ito Fumio's Kurohime katana was less than an inch away from the scabbard, countless dazzling white lights suddenly surged out of the scabbard. Kurohime, who had not been out of the scabbard for 10 years, finally came out of the scabbard. Wang. After Kurohime came out of the scabbard, the katana instantly let out an excited cry. The entire Muchio mansion's front door was instantly illuminated by the white light emitted by the katana. "Kurohime," the other ninja stuttered. "You are Ito Fumio, schwa." Before the ninja could say the word Fumio, Ito Fumio's katana had already slashed down from the sky. A white light instantly surged out from Kuroheim's katana at high speed and rushed towards the huge iron gate of the Muchio mansion. Shwa! The light from the light instantly illuminated the two ninjas' terrified faces. Boom! The huge iron gate and the tall gatehouse were instantly split in half and collapsed. Bang! Bang! The iron gate that was split in half was directly sent flying by Ito Fumio's katana. The two ninjas at the gate did not even have time to react before they were instantly smashed into meat patties by the two iron gates. Puff! Puff! Blood splattered in all directions, and rubble swirled in the air. The towering stone gate, which was more than 20 feet tall, and the enormous iron gate, which was more than half a foot thick, instantly collapsed and disintegrated. Go and find a cauldron, Ito Fumio said to Yi Fan expressionlessly. Leave the rest of the small fries to me. Just as he finished speaking, Ito Fumio used his movement skills and charged in with his long sword. Yi Fan narrowed his eyes and executed his peerless movement technique. With a whoosh, he disappeared instantly. Shwa! Yi Fan, who had just disappeared, reappeared in the sky above Autumn Twilight residence. At this time, in the Autumn Twilight mansion, a large number of ninja experts were flashing and quickly rushed to the door. There were hundreds of them, and it was still increasing. The figures were everywhere, but they were silent. These ninjas all had strange movement techniques, and their breathing was steady. With one look, one could tell that they were top-notch experts. There were actually so many experts in Muchio Mansion. High in the air, Yi Fan frowned. Shwa! 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 Close to 100 ninjas who were close to the door drew their katanas at the same time. Under the light of the torches in the courtyard, hundreds of shiny katanas shone with a cold light. Close to 100 ninjas used their movement techniques and slashed down with the katanas in their hands at almost the same time. Shwa! Close to 100 katanas were shot out from the katanas in the hands of the ninjas. These ninjas were all Matsumoto Takayoshi's men of sacrifice. They did things cleanly and ruthlessly. The moment they attacked, they would use their killing moves. There were too many of them. Yi Fan, who was in the air, began to worry about whether Ito Fumio could withstand it. However, just as he was about to go down and support Ito Fumio's roar was heard. 1,000-man slash, first form, wind shattering. Shwa! The white light screen appeared again. Bang! 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 Hundreds of katanas were instantly dispersed by the white light screen. The white light screen continued to charge forward. Puff! 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 Blood mist rose. This large group of ninjas did not even have time to blink before they were all cut in half at the waist by Ito Fumio's 1,000-man slash. Close to 100 ninjas were turned into 200 pieces of meat in an instant. Ito Fumio's move had taken the lives of over 100 ninjas. What a domineering katana. What a shocking amount of katanas. Yi Fan, who was in the air, was secretly shocked. This 1,000-man slash was indeed powerful. With one slash, 100 people were killed. Just the first move was already so powerful. If he were to use the 7th level of the 1,000 slaughter, one face of 1,000, not to mention this person from the Sunset Autumn Manor, he would be able to kill everyone in this small town in just a few slashes. After the first wave of ninjas were killed, the second and third wave of ninjas did not have any intention of retreating. Wave after wave of ninjas attacked Ito Fumio. At this time, Ito Fumio's eyes were bloodshot. The katana in his hand was swung up and slashed down continuously. Shwa! Shwa! Swoosh! Screen after screen of light shot out from Kuroji's saber. Cha! 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 One by one, the corpses were cut in half. In less than a cup of tea's time, there were no more survivors in Sunset Autumn Mansion. The mutilated corpses at the entrance had already piled up into a small hill. Blood flowed like a river. Dark red blood almost covered the entire front yard. Ito Fumio, who was expressionless and covered in blood, dragged his katana as he stepped on the river of blood and walked into the mansion step by step. Yi Fan, who was in the air, looked at the hellish scene in front of him. He did not even frown. Instead, he felt a little excited. A trace of red light flashed across his eyes. He still did not know that his evil aura had already corroded half of his spiritual altar. The urge to kill had already invaded his subconscious. Phew! Yi Fan took a deep breath and calmed his excited and beating heart. He focused on looking down from the sky, looking for the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron. The courtyard of Sunset Autumn Mansion was huge. It had a radius of more than 10 acres. Yi Fan, who was floating in the air, carefully looked at every inch of the land, afraid that he would miss out on anything. Ito Fumio, on the other hand, dragged his katana and looked for the evil cauldron on the ground. The two of them, one above the other, carried out a carpet search. After half an hour, the two of them had searched the entire Sunset Autumn Mansion twice. However, they still found nothing. Are you sure that the Soul Congregation Cauldron is in the Sunset Autumn Mansion? Ito Fumio asked Yi Fan, who had already landed on the ground. Incheon Daxiong said before he died. It should be true, Yi Fan said. After hearing this, Ito Fumio fell into deep thought. Yi Fan also frowned. The Soul Congregation Cauldron should be in the Sunset Autumn Mansion. Why couldn't they find it? At this time, the two of them did not say a word. They stood there and thought hard. For a moment, the entire Sunset Autumn Mansion was extremely quiet. Splash! Not far from them, there was water gurgling. The sound of water gave them an idea. Since it was not on the ground, the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron must be in the water. The two of them looked at each other and immediately came to the side of the water. Ito Fumio reached his hand into the pool and scooped up a handful of water to examine it carefully. The water was cold and slightly black. There's something wrong with the water. It's full of inchi. Ito Fumio frowned. The evil cauldron is in the water. Chapter 277. Wait for me up here, Ito Fumio said as he sheathed Blackie and prepared to take off his clothes. I'll go down and fish up the evil cauldron. Senior, you don't have to go into the water, Yi Fan said to Ito Fumio. I have a way. If you don't go into the water, how are you going to fish up the cauldron? Ito Fumio looked at Yi Fan in confusion. Use this, Yi Fan said as he pulled out the snake shadow sword from his waist. Snake shadow sword? Ito Fumio looked at the sword in Yi Fan's hand and blurted out. When he and Yi Kong became best friends, Yi Kong had shown him this sword. He had a deep impression of this biting, cold snake shadow sword. Senior, wait here. I'll be done soon, Yi Fan said as his body slowly rose into the air and flew 3 feet above the pool. Ito Fumio looked at Yi Fan quietly. In Yi Kong's letter to him, he already knew that Yi Fan had received the teachings of an expert and was close to becoming a half-immortal. Looking at the white-haired Yi Fan, Ito Fumio felt very gratified. His beloved disciple Fujiwara, no Chico, had such an infatuated and devoted husband. It could be said that her life was not in vain. Yi Fan, who was floating above the water, activated the snake's shadow sword in his hand. The snake's shadow sword, which was shining brightly and cold, gently slashed at the lake below. Whoosh! A thin white arc of light was instantly emitted from the snake's shadow sword and rushed straight into the pool. Crack, crack, crack. There was a crisp sound, and the sparkling water instantly began to freeze and spread rapidly. In the blink of an eye, the several feet wide pool was suddenly frozen into a large ice block by the cold air emitted by the snake's shadow sword. Rise, Yi Fan said softly. He flipped his hand and gently lifted the huge ice block through the air. Crack, 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 crack. The huge ice block, which weighed several thousand pounds, began to slowly leave the ground. What a powerful cold air. What a domineering spiritual power. Ito Fumio, who was standing at the side, was shocked. He didn't expect Yi Fan's spiritual energy to reach such a level. This huge chunk of ice weighed at least a few thousand kilograms. Yet Yi Fan was actually able to lift it so easily from a distance. The chi refinement technique of the Central Plains was indeed amazing. After the huge chunk of ice slowly rose 30 feet from the ground, it quietly floated in the air. Through the translucent ice, the two of them looked inside. Amidst the ice, there was a bronze cauldron that was 3 feet in size. Found it! Yi Fan was ecstatic. Ito Fumio's eyes also lit up. Pa! Yi Fan exerted force with one palm and slammed it directly into the ice. Boom! Ice crystals scattered in all directions, and silver dust flew everywhere. The huge ice block collapsed instantly, and the Soul Congregation evil cauldron broke out of the ice. Shwa! The moment the evil cauldron appeared, Yi Fan reached out his hand and bent his fingers into a claw. The 3 feet long bronze cauldron immediately flew towards Yi Fan. Pa! Yi Fan held the flying evil cauldron with one hand, and the bronze cauldron that weighed a few hundred kilograms landed firmly on Yi Fan's palm. Yi Fan slowly landed on the ground. Bang! Yi Fan put down the evil cauldron. The cauldron was 3 feet tall and 1 foot wide. It had 3 legs and a round mouth. It was green in color, and there were countless strange red patterns engraved on the cauldron. There was a lid on top of the cauldron, and there was a bronze toad lying on top of the lid. The toad's eyes were blood red, and there was a bronze skull in its mouth. Its entire body was densely engraved with mysterious red runes, and the entire cauldron was emitting an evil and strange aura. This is the Soul Congregation evil cauldron. Chico's soul is inside. Yi Fan said excitedly as he reached out his hand to open the lid. Wong! Just as Yi Fan's hands touched the blood-eye toad, the entire cauldron emitted a dazzling green light, and the bronze toad's eyes shot out 2 rays of red light. Chi! Yi Fan's hands suddenly emitted green smoke. A piercing pain came from his hands. In a moment of desperation, Yi Fan did not dare to delay, and immediately used his spiritual energy to cover his hands completely, and continued to open the lid. Wong! The Soul Congregation evil cauldron suddenly emitted a green light. Pa! Yi Fan only felt a huge force coming from the bronze toad, and his hands were immediately repelled by this force. Ito Fumio saw this and frowned. This Soul Congregation evil cauldron was indeed evil. After Yi Fan was repelled, he was instantly furious. His beloved wife's soul was in this cauldron, and now that it was so close, how could he be stopped by a mere cauldron lid? Yi Fan, who was in a rage, suddenly became stubborn. He placed the snake's shadow, sword back on his waist, and then focused his mind and used 80% of his spiritual energy. Yi Fan's spirit had reached its peak. 80% of his spiritual chi instantly surged out from his chi ocean and concentrated on his right arm. Yi Fan's right arm was filled with auspicious air, and 5 colors lingered around it, as if it was an arm made of light. The dazzling light was so dazzling that even Ito Fumio, who had a high cultivation level, had to take 3 steps back and use his wide sleeves to cover his eyes. Pa! Gritting his teeth, Yi Fan placed his right hand on the bronze toad of the Soul Congregation cauldron again. Wong! The green light of the Soul Congregation cauldron appeared again. Swoosh! The blood-eye toad flashed red. 2 rays of light, 1 green and 1 red, instantly wrapped around Yi Fan's 5-colored arm. Yi Fan squinted his eyes and did not care about the light of the evil cauldron at all. Wong! The evil cauldron seemed to have a mind of its own, and instantly, a green light burst out. The walnut-sized skull in the blood-eye toad's mouth also began to spin continuously. The eyes, nostrils, and mouth of the skull suddenly spat out green flames, burning fiercely. Yi Fan's 5-colored arm, the Soul Congregation evil cauldron's green light, and the blood-eye toad's red light. These few dazzling lights lit up the entire courtyard. The 2 great powers began to exhaust each other's strength. On one side, it was the earth-shattering sky-shocking from the Shintian secrets, and on the other side, it was the Soul Congregation evil cauldron and the strange toad that gathered the power of thousands of demons. For a moment, neither side was willing to give way, and it was a stalemate. "Yeah," Yi Fan roared, and his silver hair shot up into the sky, and the five-colored light in his hand suddenly increased by 3 zhong. The top of the Soul Congregation evil cauldron began to slowly leave the body of the cauldron. But even so, there was only a small gap between the mouth of the cauldron and the top cover, and countless strands of green lightning were still tightly sucking the top cover. Seeing that the evil cauldron had already opened a small gap, Yi Fan was overjoyed. He increased the strength in his hand again and used 90% of his spiritual energy. ZZZ. The countless green lightning did not pull the top cover back to the body of the cauldron, and the distance between the top cover and the body of the cauldron gradually increased. But when the top cover was less than half a foot away from the body of the cauldron, a shocking scene occurred. A pair of bloodless white hands with hook-like nails grabbed onto the walls of the evil cauldron. Then, a woman with disheveled hair, a pale face, and blood-red eyes poked her head out of the evil cauldron. Chapter 278. Seeing the demon appear, Ito Fumio did not have time to think. He immediately used one of his palms to attack Yi Fan, who was focusing on the evil cauldron. Slap! Thump! 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 Yi Fan was stunned as he was wondering what had crawled out of the evil cauldron. He did not notice that Ito Fumio had attacked him. He was pushed back 5 steps and almost fell down. Bang! Without any external force, the lid of the evil cauldron closed and merged with the body of the evil cauldron. The demon with disheveled hair was trapped inside the evil cauldron again. The evil cauldron returned to normal. "Senior, what are you doing?" Yi Fan, who had regained his senses, asked Ito Fumio anxiously. "You can't open this lid," Ito Fumio said with a serious expression. "What?" Yi Fan asked loudly. "Chico was about to come out. Why did you stop me? Are you crazy?" Ito Fumio scolded Yi Fan. "There are thousands of demons and ghosts in the evil cauldron. If you open it by force, not only will Chico come out, the entire Dongying will be finished." "I don't care," Yi Fan roared. "As long as I can save Qianzi, I don't King care about anyone else." As he spoke, he charged towards the Soul Congregation cauldron once again and prepared to open it by force. His beloved wife was so close, but he could not see her. This torture was worse than death. He could not care less. As long as he could save his beloved wife, he was willing to pay any price. Whoosh! Ito Fumio extended his leg and kicked Yi Fan, who was on the verge of breaking down. Bang! This kick was so powerful that it sent Yi Fan, who was completely unprepared for it, flying. Bang! Yi Fan fell to the ground. "You only care about your wife. Don't you care about others?" Ito Fumio said angrily. Yi Fan was furious. He stood up and used his movement technique. In an instant, he disappeared and appeared in front of Ito Fumio. The two of them were less than 3 inches apart. "What are you trying to do?" Ito Fumio frowned and asked Yi Fan, who was standing in front of him. Yi Fan's eyes were bloodshot. He gritted his teeth and looked at Ito Fumio. However, he could not say a word. "Do you think I don't want to save Chico?" Ito Fumio grabbed Yi Fan's collar and looked into Yi Fan's eyes. "She's not only your wife, she's also my disciple. Do you understand?" As Ito Fumio spoke, he pushed his hand away and released Yi Fan's collar. "What do we do now?" Yi Fan's eyes were red as he roared. "Are we just going to watch Qianzi suffer in there?" "Of course not," Ito Fumio said loudly. "Then tell me, what should we do now?" Yi Fan's voice was hoarse, and he was on the verge of breaking down. "Bring the cauldron back first," Ito Fumio said with a frown. "I'll look for Master Kong one after daybreak. Maybe he'll have a way." "Master Kongwen?" Yi Fan heard the name and felt a spark of hope. He had heard from Chico Fujiwara that not only was Master Kongwen compassionate, but he was also proficient in Buddhist doctrine. His Tantra divine powers were also at the point of perfection. With the help of Master Kongwen, things might really turn around. Thinking of this, Yi Fan gradually calmed down. Take the cauldron and come back with me, Ito Fumio said. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and rose into the air, disappearing into the night. Yifan had no choice but to carry the cauldron with one hand and use his movement skill to follow Ito Fumio back to Mount Fuji. After returning to the wooden building on Mount Fuji, the two were not in the mood to sleep. They sat at the wooden table again. Ito Fumio took out 2 bottles of sake and 2 cups and drank with Yifan. The two drank 3 cups in a row and remained silent. Is Chico's body safe now? Ito Fumio spoke first, breaking the silence. She's in a Lingyun cave now. It's safe, Yifan said, but his eyes never left the evil cauldron in the corner. He knew that his beloved wife's soul was there. Does your father know about Chico? Ito Fumio asked with a cup of wine in his hand. He doesn't know yet. Yifan shook his head and said, I don't want him to know. He'll be worried. Ito Fumio frowned. This child's cultivation was high. He was loyal, and he was filial. He was a rare seedling. To be honest, these things should not have happened to him. If you knew this would happen, you wouldn't have let Chico go to the great Ming dynasty. Yifan drank a cup of sake and said to Ito Fumio, you should persuade her to give up the idea of revenge and find a good family to marry. She can live a normal life. It's good. You say it so easily. Ito Fumio smiled. If it was you, would you let it go? Yifan was stunned at first, but then he smiled bitterly. Ito Fumio was right. If it was him, he would be more obsessed with revenge than Fujiwara no Chico. After meeting Master Kong, one tomorrow, you have to go back no matter what, Ito Fumio said as he poured the sake. This is the East Ocean continent. It's Xietian's territory. You're not safe here. I'll go wherever I can save Chico, Yifan said as he drank the sake. I don't care if it's Xietian or Xietian. I know your cultivation is high, but you're not his opponent now. Ito Fumio said to Yifan, if you really care about Chico, don't act rashly. I'll listen to Senior. Yifan nodded after hearing Ito Fumio's words. As long as I can save Chico, I'm willing to do anything. That's good, Ito Fumio said as he looked at Yifan's bloodshot eyes. Go upstairs and rest now. I'll pack up and immediately go to Shimizu Temple to find Master Kong One. This. All right, Yifan replied. Since he had promised Ito Fumio, he had to keep his word. Senior, be careful, Yifan said as he stood up. Yes. Ito Fumio stood up as he spoke and put the black samurai sword back on his waist. You stay here and look after the evil cauldron. I'll be back in 2 hours. Senior, don't worry, Yifan said. Yes, Ito Fumio said as he slowly walked out of the room. He used his movement technique to soar into the air and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Yifan walked straight to the evil cauldron in the corner of the room. He bent down and picked up the cauldron that weighed several hundred kilograms with one hand and slowly walked up to the second floor. When he pushed open the wooden sliding door to the bedroom on the second floor, Yifan's tears almost flowed out. This was the bedroom where his beloved wife, Fujiwara no Chico, had lived. Everything was still the same. Even though Fujiwara no Chico had been gone for a long time, his 5 senses were very sharp, and he could smell the familiar scent of Fujiwara no Chico. After Yifan placed the evil cauldron in the middle of the bedroom, he slowly sat down in front of the dressing table in the room. He reached for the sandalwood comb on the dressing table and gently stroked it with his hand. A few strands of hair were wrapped around the teeth of the delicate wooden comb. Yifan gently took off the hair and put it in front of his nose to smell it. Chapter 279. Yifan's heart was torn apart again. His eyes red, he took out a blanket from the closet and laid it on the smooth wooden floor. After laying it down, Yifan lay on it and greedily sniffed Fujiwara no Chico's body scent. Chico! Tears streamed down Yifan's face as he caressed the white blanket and muttered to himself. Just as Yifan was heartbroken, the evil soul gathering cauldron beside him suddenly emitted a white light. The light was very gentle and did not contain any evil energy. Yifan, who was lying on the blanket, was stunned at first, but then he immediately sat up and walked to the evil cauldron. Chico, is that you? Yi Fan asked in shock. Husband, husband. Fujiwara no Chico's ethereal voice came from the evil cauldron. Chico. Yi Fan wiped away his tears and said in surprise, Is it really you? Husband, husband. Fujiwara no Chico's voice continued to echo, but it was getting weaker and weaker. Chico, Chico. Yi Fan shouted Fujiwara no Chico's name. As the light from the evil cauldron dimmed, Fujiwara no Chico's voice also disappeared. Chico, Yi Fan cried. The voice just now was definitely not an illusion. It was really the voice of his beloved wife. Chico, don't worry, Yi Fan said to the evil cauldron in tears. I will save you. The evil cauldron did not respond. Yi Fan wiped away his tears and got up. He sat cross-legged on the futon in the room and started to absorb spirit energy. The only thing he could do now was to try his best to raise his cultivation. 2 hours later, Yi Fan slowly opened his eyes on the futon. He could hear Ito Fumio's breathing 1,000 feet away. Together with Ito Fumio, there was another person with an extremely high cultivation. He should be the savior of his beloved wife, Grandmaster Kong 1. The reason why he was so sure was because Yi Fan had already memorized Ito Fumio's breathing rhythm, the depth of his breath, and the sound of his footsteps. After the incident where Zhou Quan had pretended to be his father and deceived him, he had become more cautious. Every time he saw an acquaintance, he would carefully identify and confirm. After he had been severely injured by the blue-clothed man, Yi Feishue had been treating his injuries. He had learned from Yi Feishue how to break the other party's disguise technique. Disguising techniques not only allowed one to imitate the other party's appearance and voice, but some experts could also imitate the other party's figure and expression, making it impossible to guard against. However, Yi Feishue told Yi Fan that no matter how good a disguise expert was, there were 3 characteristics that could never be imitated. They were the breathing rhythm, the depth of his breath, and the sound of his footsteps. Just like fingerprints, every person's breathing rhythm, depth of his breath, and footsteps were different. As long as he remembered these 3 characteristics, he could tell if a person was impersonating someone. Ever since then, Yi Fan had developed the habit of observing these 3 characteristics of his opponents. Yi Fan stood up and carried the evil cauldron with one hand. He slowly walked down the stairs and arrived at the first floor. Whoosh! Yi Fan had just placed the evil cauldron on the ground when 2 figures appeared at the door. One was Ito Fumio, who was dressed in white and had a long sword at his waist. The other was a bald monk in gray monk robes and monk shoes. This monk looked to be in his 50s. He had a kind face and a pair of drooping ears. He wore prayer beads around his neck and held a staff in his hand. His white beard fluttered in front of his chest. What dignified senior monk. Yi Fan sighed in his heart. Amiba, the monk chanted. This benefactor must be Chico's husband. Qingshui Temple was founded by Master Xuanzang's proud disciple, Master Sun. There were many Han Buddhist scriptures in the temple, so every abbot was very proficient in Chinese. Yi Fan, Ito Fumio began to introduce him to Yi Fan. This is Master Kong 1, the one I told you about. Greetings, Master Kong 1. Yi Fan immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Master Kong 1. Master Kong 1 was his beloved wife's savior. If it weren't for Master Kong 1's help, his beloved wife would probably still be suffering in the palace. She might not even be alive anymore. Get up, Master Kong 1 said as he helped Yi Fan up. Master, please save Chico. Yi Fan, who had just gotten up, said as he prepared to kneel again. Chico is my best friend's daughter. Master Kong 1 hurriedly supported Yi Fan. This old monk will do his best. Don't be in a hurry to bow. Ito Fumio said to Yi Fan. Let the master see this soul congregation cauldron. Yes. Yi Fan said. Master, please take a look. This is the evil cauldron. Chico's soul is trapped inside. Yi Fan said as he brought Master Kong 1 to the soul congregation cauldron. What a heavy, evil aura. When Master Kong 1 saw the evil cauldron on the ground, he immediately cried out in alarm. Master, the anxious Yi Fan was just about to ask Master Kong 1 if he could save his beloved wife's soul when Ito Fumio stopped Yi Fan, indicating that Yi Fan should not disturb Master Kongwen. Yi Fan understood what he meant and remained silent. Master Kongwen slowly circled around the Soul Congregation cauldron, carefully examining the mysterious and strange patterns on the copper cauldron. His expression became more and more dignified, and his brows furrowed into a knot. Soul Congregation Talisman, Demon Subduing Seal, in Refining Pattern, Soul Suppression Diagram. Master Kongwen frowned and shook his head. What a sinister method. Master, can you save Chico? Yi Fan saw Master Kongwen's troubled expression, so he did not care about etiquette and asked anxiously. Fortunately, Ito stopped you just now. Grandmaster Kongwen turned around and said to Yi Fan with a solemn expression, if you had forcefully opened the cauldron just now, not only would it have caused the demons to lose control and plunge the people into misery and suffering, I'm afraid even Qinzi's soul would have been destroyed. What? Her soul would be destroyed? When Yi Fan heard Master Kongwen's words, he immediately broke out in a cold sweat. This Soul Congregation cauldron is filled with demons and ghosts. Master Kongwen looked at the stunned Yi Fan and slowly said, only by using blood to unlock the seal on the evil cauldron could Chico's soul safely leave the cauldron. Blood? Seal? Ito Fumio asked with a frown. That's right. Master Kongwen continued. This Soul Congregation cauldron has been sealed by someone using an evil technique. Other than the person who sealed it, no one else can open the cauldron. If an external force was used to open it, the consequences would be unimaginable. What would the consequences be? Ito Fumio asked. Chapter 280. After Ito Fumio heard this, he turned to look at Yi Fan. Yi Fan was sweating profusely and kept wiping his sweat. He was afraid of his reckless actions just now. If he had forcefully opened the cauldron, it would be no different from killing his beloved wife. Master, how is Chico's soul in there? Is she suffering? Yi Fan asked anxiously. She's definitely suffering, Master Kongwen said with a frown. Chico is just the Een spirit now. She's definitely not having a good time in there. Master, please have mercy and save Chico. When Yi Fan thought of his beloved wife's soul being trapped with those demons and ghosts, his heart felt like it was being pierced by thousands of arrows. He knelt in front of Master Kongwen again and begged him to save his beloved wife. Good child, quickly get up. Master Kongwen helped Yi Fan up. This old monk would do his best. All of you, step back first. Grandmaster Kongwen said after helping Yi Fan up. When Ito Fumio and Yi Fan saw that Master Kongwen was about to perform a spell to save her, they immediately retreated 5 feet. Umaba, Master Kongwen chanted. He first put his staff aside, then took off the string of Buddhist beads around his neck. There were a total of 108 Buddhist beads. They were the size of a pigeon's egg and were shiny black. Each bead had a golden swastika on it, looking extremely solemn. Master Kongwen slowly wrapped the Buddhist beads around the Soul Congregation cauldron. When the Buddhist beads touched the Soul Congregation cauldron, the blood-eye toad's eyes immediately emitted 2 rays of red light. Swoosh! At the same time, the Soul Congregation evil cauldron's body began to shine with a green light. The 108 Buddhist beads wrapped around the Soul Congregation evil cauldron instantly emitted a faint golden light. When the red light emitted by the blood-eye toad came into contact with the golden light of the Buddhist beads, it instantly shrunk and circled around the toad's body. In the blink of an eye, the red light had completely enveloped the blood-eye toad and shone brightly. The blood-eye toad was accumulating power. Yi Fan frowned. Zzz. The green light on the cauldron's body instantly surged, and there was a faint green electric light swimming around it. The evil cauldron was also ready to attack. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The green lightning on the body of the cauldron began to slowly move upward, gradually climbing above the prayer beads and gradually enveloping them. The golden light of the prayer beads began to dim. When Great Master Kongwen saw that the spiritual energy of the Buddhist prayer beads was blocked, He immediately put his palms together and closed his eyes. Namo hi luo na luo yi. Namo a luo yi. Polu jiedi. Shua bo luo yi. Bodhisa luo yi. Mahasa luo yi. Great Master Kong began to recite Guanyin Bodhisattva's Great Compassion Learning. Under the support of Great Master Kong Win's Great Compassion Mantra, the Buddhist beads that were gradually dimming suddenly burst with golden light. The dazzling green lightning was instantly suppressed by the golden light emitted by the prayer beads. The green electric light surged again as it resisted stubbornly. Buzz! At this moment, the blood-eyed toad's eyes flashed red, and two red electric arcs shot out, shooting straight at the prayer beads. Hiss! The Buddha beads were suddenly wrapped in golden light and entangled with red light. The two forces clashed with each other, causing sizzling sounds to ring out. Grandmaster Kong Win's deep chanting gradually sped up. At the same time, he began to form the Great Compassion Hand Seal. The 108 Buddhist beads on the Evil Soul Gatherer cauldron burst out in golden light. Each of the Buddhist beads instantly doubled in size. The swastika on each of the beads shone with a dazzling golden light, blinding the eyes. Bang! The red light that wrapped around the prayer beads instantly exploded. Wong! The entire string of Buddhist beads began to revolve around the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron. Looking at the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron again, under the dazzling golden Buddhist energy, its light gradually dimmed. The entire cauldron was completely covered by a layer of golden light. Croak! Just as the golden light on the prayer beads was gradually engulfing the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron, the blood-eyed toad suddenly let out a croak. The sound was deafening, loud and clear, and it shook the hearts of those who heard it. Even Yi Fan and Ito Fumio, who were 5 feet away from the blood-eyed toad, were forced to take 3 steps back from the sound. Wong! After the croak, the entire evil cauldron instantly glowed red and doubled in size. The originally 3 feet tall bronze cauldron suddenly became 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Crack, crack, crack! Grandmaster Kong Win's Buddhist beads began to tighten under the pressure of the evil cauldron, emitting crisp sounds. Swoosh! Grandmaster Kong Win instantly opened his eyes, and the Great Compassion Mantra in his mouth sped up again. The hand seals that he formed were also changing rapidly. Wong! The dazzling golden Buddhist beads suddenly burst out in golden light, and the Buddhist beads instantly tripled in size. Each Buddhist bead was already the size of a fist. Croak! The blood-eyed toad let out a second croak. Bang! A blood-red shockwave rapidly spread out from the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron. It was so fast that it arrived in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, Grandmaster Kong Won, who was chanting nonstop, suddenly picked up the golden Buddhist staff beside him and violently stabbed it in front of him. Bang! The golden Buddhist staff pierced straight through the wooden floor. Si diendu mandolo batui sapi. Grandmaster Kong Win's hands formed a hand seal, and his monk robes fluttered without any wind as he chanted the mantra. When the red shockwave reached the Buddhist staff, Grandmaster Kong Win had just finished chanting the Great Compassion Mantra. Wong! The bronze rings on the golden Buddhist staff buzzed, and the entire staff suddenly shone brightly. Bang! A golden shockwave rapidly spread out from the golden Buddhist staff. At the same time, the string of dazzling golden Buddhist beads wrapped around the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron flew into the air above the evil cauldron. Whoosh! The Buddhist beads suspended in the air emitted 108 golden pillars of light that poured down from the top, completely enveloping the evil cauldron below. Boom! The golden light was dazzling, and the red light was blazing. The two shock waves, one golden and one red, collided in an instant, creating a huge roar. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk Grandmaster Kong was forced to take a few steps back by this tremendous force. Croak! The sole congregation evil cauldron, which was enveloped by the golden light of the Buddhist beads, let out a third croak. Red light, countless red lights. The red light shot out from the evil cauldron, and the entire evil cauldron had turned into a red cauldron of light. Not good. Grandmaster Kong I, who had just stabilized himself, immediately waved his hand at the Buddhist beads in the air. Whoosh! The dazzling golden Buddhist beads suspended in the air instantly dissipated and returned to their original state, flying back into Grandmaster Kong Wen's hands. The Red Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron seemed to have a mind of its own. When it saw that the binding force from the outside was removed, it immediately dissipated its light and gradually became smaller, returning to its original state. Phew! Grandmaster Kong Wen let out a long breath. Chapter 281. This evil cauldron is already matured, Master Kong Wen said as he put the prayer beads back around his neck. Just now, I used the Great Compassion mantra to dissolve its evil aura and make it unseal itself. Who would have thought that this evil cauldron had already absorbed the power of thousands of demons and gained sentience? It would rather die than convert to Buddhism. Die. Ito Fumio frowned. Could it be that the situation just now was, if I hadn't stopped in time, I'm afraid this evil cauldron would have perished along with the countless living beings inside, Master Kong Wen said. In that case, Chico's soul would have vanished in a thin air. After hearing Master Kong Wen's words, Yi Fan stared blankly and remained silent. He didn't think that even Master Kong Wen, who was proficient in Buddhism, would be helpless. Master, is there any other way? Ito Fumio was anxious to save his disciple and hurriedly asked. Grandmaster Kong Wen shook his head. Only when the person who sealed it personally unseals, it can the soul of Qinzi safely be taken out. There's no other way. Does Master know who sealed the cauldron? Ito Fumio frowned and asked. Matsumoto Takeyoshi, Yi Fan said with a cold expression. He finally understood why Matsumoto Takeyoshi had smiled meaningfully when he killed Inchan. The reason was simple. Matsumoto Takeyoshi already knew that other than him, no one else could open this evil cauldron. Senior Ito, Master Kong Wen. Yi Fan raised his hands and bowed to the two. Only Matsumoto Takeyoshi can open this evil cauldron. I will now bring it back to the great Ming dynasty. Yi Fan will remember the kindness of the two seniors and repay it another day. As Yi Fan spoke, he reached under the cauldron and lifted it up. You want to see Matsumoto Takeyoshi? Ito Fumio asked Yi Fan. That's right. I want him to return Chico's soul to me, Yi Fan said. If you go like this, you will fall right into his trap. Ito Fumio reminded Yi Fan. I know, Yi Fan said calmly. Then why did you still go? Ito Fumio asked anxiously. Senior, tell me, what else can I do? Yi Fan frowned and looked at Ito Fumio. Are we just going to watch Chico suffer inside? Ito Fumio didn't say anything. He did not know how to answer this question. Benefactor Yi, Great Master Kong Wen said, if you truly wish to return to the great Ming dynasty, this old monk will not stop you. However, this old monk has a word of advice that I hope Benefactor Yi will reconsider. Grandmaster, you're being too courteous. Feel free to speak your mind, Yi Fan said. This evil cauldron has absorbed the energy of thousands of demons and ghosts. It has already gained sentience. You must not be bewitched by it and fall into a demonic trap, Great Master Kong Wen said. Yi Fan's heart trembled. Great Master Kong Wen's words reminded him of Fujiwara no Chico's voice that came from the evil cauldron. Could it be that the evil cauldron was trying to bewitch him? Yi Fan's heart began to beat like a drum. There is one more thing that this old monk would like to remind Benefactor Yi, Great Master Kong Wen said as he looked into Yi Fan's eyes. Please speak, Great Master, Yi Fan said. This old monk observes that Benefactor Ye's heart is impetuous and the evil energy is growing. Above your spiritual altar, there's already a black energy lingering. Great Master Kong Wen said to Yi Fan with a serious expression. Listen to this old monk. Do not fall into the demonic path. Otherwise, you will be consigned to eternal damnation. Great Master Kong when emphasized this sentence. This junior will remember, Yi Fan said as he bowed to the two of them. Seniors, please take care of yourselves. This junior will take his leave first. After Yi Fan finished speaking, he quickly used his Imperial Spirit Chi to perform a movement technique. A shadow flashed out of the room, followed by a white light that cut across the sky. Sigh, what a sin! Great Master Kong walked out of the door and looked at the white light that was gradually disappearing into the distance. He shook his head and sighed. In Great Master's opinion, is this a blessing or a curse? Ito Fumio said as he walked to Great Master Kong. Win sighed and looked up at Yi Kong. Misfortune and blessing go together. It is both a blessing and a curse, Great Master Kong said with a frown. Above the clouds, Yi Fan, who was holding the cauldron with one hand, was moving forward rapidly. Although he had obtained the Soul Congregation cauldron on this trip to Dongying, Chico's soul was still trapped inside. But no matter what, this trip was not in vain. His beloved wife's soul was almost within reach. Chico, Yi Fan, who was above the clouds, said to the evil cauldron in his hand, "Don't worry, I will definitely think of a way to save you." He had thought it through. He would first return to the Lingyun cave, then bring the evil cauldron, Xiao Zhao, and his beloved wife's physical body to Pear Blossom Palace. Chico's physical body would be safer there. Xiao Zhao was the only disciple that Jinshan was proud of. In order to save him, she did not hesitate to give him her natal inner elixir. No matter what, he had to give Jinshan an explanation. In addition, Jinshan's cultivation level was extremely high. Perhaps she would have a way to save Chico's soul. Yi Fan thought as he sped up. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, he had crossed the ocean, crossed thousands of rivers and mountains, and arrived directly above Phoenix Cry Mountain. Rumble. Yi Fan, who was slowly descending, waved his hand, and the stone door of the Lingyun cave opened with a bang. Yi Fan slowly flew into the cave and put down the evil cauldron in his hand. Xiao Zhao. Yi Fan closed the stone door as he called out Xiao Zhao's name. A white figure flew down from the top of the stairs, and in the blink of an eye, it was in front of Yi Fan and directly jumped into his arms. Pata! Pata! Baihu in his arms stuck out her soft tongue and passionately licked Yi Fan's face. Silly girl. Yi Fan stroked Baihu's smooth fur as he dodged Baihu's tongue. All right, aren't I back? Yi Fan understood Xiao Zhao's thoughts. Baihu looked tenderly at Yi Fan and quietly lay in his arms, licking Yi Fan's hand from time to time. Did you wait for too long? Yi Fan asked Baihu. Baihu nodded. Where's Chico? Yi Fan asked. Baihu turned her head to look upstairs and then turned back to look at Yi Fan. I'll go see Chico. Yi Fan placed Baihu on the ground and then quickly went upstairs. Baihu followed closely behind. In the spacious stone room, a huge ice coffin reflected the 5 colors of light. In the ice coffin, Fujiwara no Chico lay there quietly, as if she was asleep. Chico. Yi Fan bent down and reached out to touch the ice coffin. He really hoped that this was all a dream, and that when he woke up, Fujiwara no Chico would still be by his side, and everything would be the same as before. But the bone-chilling ice coffin told him that this was all reality and not a dream. Woo! Baihu jumped onto the stone bed with an apple in her mouth, and then placed the apple in Yi Fan's hand. Even though she had become Baihu, she was still the Xiao Zhao who loved Yi Fan deeply. Silly girl, I'm not hungry. Yi Fan stroked Baihu's head and said. Baihu closed her eyes and enjoyed Yi Fan's touch. Chapter 282. The inner core glowed brightly and was wrapped in a red light. It floated in Yi Fan's palm and kept spinning. Baihu looked at the inner core in Yi Fan's hand and then tilted its head to look at Yi Fan with a puzzled expression. This is a 1,000-year-old spiritual core. Here, Yi Fan said as he extended his hand and put the inner core in front of Baihu's mouth. Eat it. Baihu took a few steps back and shook its head. Although it was Baihu, it could still tell the difference between a spiritual core and an inner core. Spiritual cores were refined from a pill furnace and were usually surrounded by auspicious air and light. Although the red core in Yi Fan's hand was full of spiritual energy, there were traces of blood on it. It was obvious that this was an inner core of a spiritual creature. She knew that Yi Fan had killed again, otherwise he wouldn't have this kind of thing. What? You're not eating it? Yi Fan was a bit puzzled. He didn't understand why Xiao Zhao wasn't eating it. 1,000-year-old inner core was hard to find, and Inchan Daxiong's inner core was even harder to find. The reason was simple. Inchan Daxiong was good at absorbing other people's spiritual energy. His inner core was filled with all kinds of spiritual energy and was very hard to find. Baihu nodded. This 1,000-year-old inner core was very hard to find, but she wasn't willing to eat it. Her parents had lost their lives because their inner cores were forcefully taken away. How could she swallow other people's inner cores? If that was the case, what was the difference between her and the yellow-robed Taoist? If you eat it, you might be able to turn back into a human. Yi Fan advised Baihu. Baihu shook its head again. It jumped up from the stone bed and onto the stone table. Then it reached into the teacup with its snow-white claws and dipped it into the tea. Then it gestured on the stone table. Yi Fan was puzzled. He got up and walked to the stone table. He did not understand what Xiao Zhao was doing. When he saw the two crooked words on the stone table, he understood what Xiao Zhao was thinking. On the stone table, Baihu used tea to write two words, parents. I understand. Yi Fan reached out and hugged the white fox who was staring at him in a daze. Big brother, Yi has wronged you. Baihu began to lick Yi Fan's hand again. Yi Fan placed the red, glowing Niden into his bosom. Although this Niden belonged to that bastard, it was still a good item. Perhaps it would come in handy in the future. When the time comes, I'll get you a real spirit pill, Yi Fan said to Xiao Zhao, who was in his arms. Baihu quietly lay in Yi Fan's arms, motionless. If she could be in Yi Fan's arms every day, even if she was in Baihu's body, she would be willing. Xiao Zhao, get ready. Yi Fan lowered his head and said to Baihu, I'm taking you and Chico back to Pear Blossom Palace. When the white fox in his arms heard the news, it quickly raised its head and looked at Yi Fan. She was afraid she would leave Yi Fan. This time, I'm going to send Chico's physical body and the soul-gathering evil cauldron to Pear Blossom Palace. Yi Fan stroked Baihu's head and said, Chico's soul is in the evil cauldron right now. This time, I'm going to Pear Blossom Palace to see if Granny can save Chico and to send you back. It's too dangerous for you to follow me. Plop! The white fox in his arms immediately jumped to the ground. While looking at Yi Fan, it kept retreating backwards. It was obvious she didn't want to go back. She wanted to stay by Yi Fan's side. Xiao Zhao, listen to me. Yi Fan saw that Xiao Zhao was unwilling and immediately prepared to explain. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Baihu didn't listen to Yi Fan's explanation. She turned around and quickly ran out. Xiao Zhao. Xiao, Yi Fan said and shook his head helplessly. He was telling the truth. Xiao Zhao would be in danger if she stayed by his side. If Jinshan couldn't do anything about the evil cauldron, then he could only go find Matsumoto Takeyoshi. Matsumoto Takeyoshi had many experts by his side. It was hard to say if he could escape unscathed, let alone bring Xiao Zhao along. Xiao Zhao couldn't follow him no matter what. Yi Fan made up his mind. As he thought, he walked out to find Xiao Zhao. Beside the full moon pavilion, Baihu was quietly lying on the stone table. She looked down at the picturesque scenery in a daze. At this time, the sky was bright and it was spring. The stream at the foot of Phoenix Crime Mountain gurgled. The peach blossoms were red and the willows were green. The scenery was pleasant. Xiao Zhao. Yi Fan's voice came from afar. The white fox turned its head to take a look, then laid down again. Xiao Zhao, why are you here? Yi Fan said as he came to the full moon pavilion. Baihu didn't move. She continued to look at the scenery. Angry? Yi Fan sat on the stone bench. Baihu still didn't move. Be good and cultivate well in Pear Blossom Palace, Yi Fan said. When this matter is over, I will take you to find Ye Qing and ask him for 8 or 1,000 grass pills to let you regain your human form. The white fox was still the same. It laid on the stone table and ignored Yi Fan. I've already lost Chico. Yi Fan said calmly. I don't want to lose you as well. After hearing Yi Fan's words, Baihu's body trembled. Her crystal-like eyes began to sparkle. I know what you're thinking. Yi Fan continued. I also know what you're thinking. Brother, Yi has let you down. The white fox on the stone table suddenly stood up, jumped off the stone table, and ran away quickly. On the stone bench, Yi Fan smiled bitterly. If Xiao Zhao continued to be so stubborn, he could only forcefully take her away. Just as Yi Fan was about to get up and leave the full moon pavilion, Baihu ran over with a bundle in her mouth. Xiao Zhao. Yi Fan's face was filled with confusion. He originally thought that Xiao Zhao was avoiding him again. He didn't expect that she really went to pack her things. Whoosh! Baihu suddenly jumped onto the stone table. Then, she let go of the bundle in her mouth and placed it on the stone table. Xiao Zhao. Seeing Baihu's teary eyes, Yi Fan's heart began to feel uneasy. After Xiao Zhao left, he had repeatedly urged her to come back. This time, Xiao Zhao came back. After saving his life, she didn't want to leave, but he tried every possible way to make her leave. He suddenly felt that he was a complete scoundrel. After the white fox glanced at Yi Fan, it stretched out its snow-white claws and opened the cloth bag in a few moves. After Xiao Zhao showed her true form, Yi Fan directly put her clothes and the things inside into the bundle. He didn't look carefully. He saw Xiao Zhao suddenly open the bundle and didn't know what she was going to do. After the bundle was opened, Baihu picked up the 4 treasures that her martial uncles had given her and placed them in Yi Fan's hands. Her meaning was very clear. She wanted to give these things to Yi Fan. There was a bead that was flowing with light, a small branch, a small fiery red stone, and a small bag filled with fine sand. Looking at these strange things in his hands, Yi Fan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Stone, branch, fine sand. When did Xiao Zhao start to like these things? Although Yi Fan didn't know that these things were treasures, he still put them in his arms, because these were things that Xiao Zhao had given to him. Baihu then used her claws to rummage through the bundle, as if she was still looking for something. Chapter 283. It's a bell. A green bell. It's exactly the same as the white bell in my pocket. When Yi Fan saw it, he was shocked. Why does Xiao Zhao have this thing? How many bells does she have? The white bell in my hand, the black bell on Cui Ziyuan's waist, and the green bell on Xiao Zhao's waist. Until now, there are already 3 of these bells. No, it's 4. Dai Tengu had told him before that Yi Ming has a red bell. Baihu picked up the green bell and handed it to Yi Fan. Looking at the green bell in his hand, Yi Fan's heart was filled with doubts. What kind of shocking secret is hidden in these bells? Why did Dai Tengu come all the way to Great Ming Dynasty to steal these bells? While Yi Fan was thinking, Baihu picked up the bag and jumped down from the stone table. She quietly looked at Yi Fan. Yi Fan understood that Xiao Zhao has already agreed to return to Pear Blossom Palace above the clouds. Yi Fan held the Soul Congregation Evil Cauldron in his left hand and carried the huge ice coffin on his right shoulder. On his back, he carried the bag and the Leaf Fire sword. Baihu was lying on Yi Fan's left shoulder tightly. A man, a fox, a bronze cauldron, an ice coffin, a strange and eye-catching combination. Xiao Zhao, are you afraid? Yi Fan turned his head and asked Baihu, who was on his left shoulder. Baihu shook her head. When she was with Yi Fan, she had never felt afraid. We will be there in a while, Yi Fan said as he circulated a surge of spirit energy from his Qi and wrapped Baihu, who was on his left shoulder. Xiao Zhao is now in Baihu's body. She has lost her inner core and her cultivation is gone. In this high up in the sky, it is very easy for her to be frostbitten by the cold air. Originally, with his current movement technique, it would only take the time to brew a cup of tea to travel from the Lingyun Cave to the Pear Blossom Palace. However, if he brought Xiao Zhao along, he had to slow down. If he went too fast, Xiao Zhao wouldn't be able to stand it. Not to mention other things, even breathing under the high speed would become very difficult. 2 hours later, they had already entered the Miao territory. Yi Fan began to slow down and prepared to descend. At this moment, a large red palanquin rushed out from the clouds on the opposite side. whistling towards Yifan. His speed was so fast that it was astonishing. It was Jin Chan's sedan. Yifan recognized him at a glance. Yifan and the red palanquin were moving in opposite directions. Both of them were extremely fast, so they quickly arrived in front of each other. Shua! Yifan stopped. Shua! The red palanquin also quickly came to a stop. Xiao Zhao! Chico! The large red palanquin's curtain was lifted, and Jin Chan, whose eyes were red, rushed out from the palanquin. She stepped on the void and shouted. Wu! Baihu, who was lying on Yifan's left shoulder, whimpered when she saw her master whom she had not seen for many days. She quickly jumped into Jin Chan's arms. Xiao Zhao! Chico! When she saw Xiao Zhao, who was already in Baihu's body, and Fujiwara no Chico in the ice coffin, Jin Chan screamed at the top of her lungs. Just now, when Yifan had just entered the Miao territory, she, who had an extremely high cultivation, had sensed the aura of Yifan and Xiao Zhao. Yifan's aura was stable, and his cultivation was no longer the same as it was a few months ago. However, at the same time, the evil aura on his body was also several times stronger than before. Xiao Zhao, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. The aura that Jin Chan sensed was no longer the Buffon girl with spiritual aura, but the real Baihu. Xiao Zhao's cultivation and inner core were all gone. Jin Chan really hoped that her perception was wrong. However, when she saw the silver-haired Yifan with bloodshot eyes, Xiao Zhao with no spiritual aura, and the frozen and dead Fujiwara no Chico in the ice coffin with her own eyes, she instantly felt as if the sky had collapsed and the earth had collapsed. All of this was real. Patter, patter. Baihu, who was in Jin Chan's arms, began to gently lick Jin Chan's hand. In Lihua Palace, Jin Chan, whose eyes were red, kept shaking her head after listening to everything that Yifan said. Master Tian Kanzi was right. Xiao Zhao's tribulation of man had appeared. Moreover, she and Yifan were each other's saviors. This time, it was Xiao Zhao who used her natal inner core to save Yifan. Grandma, Yifan is useless, the silver-haired Yifan said and knelt down in front of Jin Chan. I couldn't stop Xiao Zhao from doing stupid things. You kid, get up quickly. When Golden Silkworm saw Yifan kneeling in front of him, he hurriedly reached out to help him up. Xiao Zhao saved you of her own accord. How could she blame you? Grandma, do you have any way to save Chico? After getting up, Yifan asked Jin Chan. I have seen the evil cauldrons that you brought. Chico's soul is indeed inside. However, Jin Chan frowned and said, if you want to save Chico safely, you can only find Matsumoto Takeyoshi. There is no other way. Grandma, you can't open this soul-gathering cauldron? Hearing Jin Chan's words, Yifan asked anxiously. It is easy to enter the cauldron, but difficult to leave, Jin Chan said to Yifan. Opening this evil cauldron is one thing. Saving Chico's soul is another. Forcefully opening the cauldron will only backfire. Jin Chan's words were exactly the same as what Master Kong said. If that is the case, then I can only find Matsumoto Takeyoshi. Yifan said as he stood up. You know this is a trap, and you still want to find him? Jin Chan asked with a frown. Right now, only he can save Chico. What else can I do but find him? Yifan said as he prepared to leave. Other than finding Matsumoto Takeyoshi, there's another way. I just don't know if it will work. Jin Chan hesitated before speaking. What is it? Yifan immediately asked after hearing Jin Chan's words. Have you heard of the soul-returning incense? Jin Chan asked Yifan. Soul-returning incense. Yifan vaguely remembered that he seemed to have seen this name in an ancient book. The soul-returning incense, the king of all medicines. Although Ganoderma and ginseng cannot compare, Jin Chan said as she stood up. When Emperor Wu of Han was on the throne, the Yuezhi kingdom of the western regions once offered him 3. It is said that this item is as big as a swallow's egg and as black as a mulberry. If this incense is burned, the sick will wake up upon smelling it. Those who have died less than 3 days ago will be revived upon smelling it. This item really has such an effect? Yi Fan asked. When I was studying medicine under my master, I once asked him. He told me that this item really did exist, Jin Shan said. Even Emperor Wu of Han was skeptical and questioned the efficacy of this item. At that time, there was a great plague in Chang'an. Countless people died, and there were many infected in the palace. In order to prove the efficacy of this item, the emissary of the western regions asked Emperor Wu of Han to burn one to ward off the evil qi of the plague. Emperor Wu agreed, and the emissary burned it on the spot. Immediately, the fragrance spread for hundreds of miles. Without rest, within hundreds of miles, all the sick were cured, and those who had died less than 3 days ago were revived. Even if this item really does exist, Chico has been dead for more than a month. Furthermore, her soul is in the evil cauldron. Even if we obtain this item, it will not help, Yi Fan said with a frown. Chapter 284. Soul Returning Her. Yi Fan frowned. That's right. I've heard Master mention this soul returning herb before. It's extremely rare, but it has the effect of capturing souls and bringing them back to life, Jin Shan said to Yi Fan. However, this herb grows on glaciers in the extreme north all year round. It takes 30 years to grow, 10 years to break the ice, 10 years to grow, and 10 years to bloom. This herb is different from ordinary flowers and plants. It doesn't like to grow on the ground. It either grows on the peak of high icebergs or in deep ice valleys. It appears during the day to absorb the essence of the rain and dew, and it shrinks into the ice at night. This herb is as white as jade, and there are often spiritual creatures guarding it by the side. In addition, this soul-returning herb can only be effective after it blooms, and its flowering period is only 2 hours. After 2 hours, the petals will wither, and it will be no different from an ordinary herb. Therefore, many herb-gathering experts will guard the icebergs all year round in order to pick the soul-returning herb as soon as it blooms and make it into a long-lasting soul-returning incense within 2 hours. However, even if it's made into a soul-returning incense, its effect will be greatly reduced. It can only save the dead who have been dead for less than 3 days. Granny, you mean that if I can obtain this soul-returning herb and give it to Chico within 2 hours, Chico's soul will enter her body and she will be brought back to life? That's possible, Jin Shan said with a nod. Yi Fan's heart was once again rekindled with hope. With his current movement technique, it only took him the time to brew a cup of tea from the Lingyun cave to the Pear Blossom Palace. It only took him the time for an incense to burn to return from Japan. This was under the condition that he had not activated his movement technique to the extreme. If he focused all his spiritual energy on activating his movement technique, he could travel at least 10,000 kilometers in 2 hours. There was no time to lose. He had to find the soul-returning herb now. Since that's the case, I'll immediately head to the extreme north. Yi Fan stood up and said to Jin Shan, Granny, please take care of Chico and Xiao Zhao. You're leaving now? Jin Shan asked. Yi Fan nodded. Chico will have to suffer as long as she stays in the evil cauldron. I have to find the soul-returning grass as soon as possible. Jin Shan frowned, then nodded solemnly. Originally, she wanted to mention the evil aura in Yi Fan's body, but on second thought, Yi Fan was in a hurry to save his wife. Even if she spouted lotus flowers now, Yi Fan probably wouldn't listen. His master was right. Everything depended on him. It is inconvenient for me to carry this evil cauldron with me. I will leave it with Granny for now, Yi Fan said. Just do what you need to do. I'll be here, so don't worry, Jin Shan said. The environment in the extreme north is extremely harsh, so you must be careful when you go there. Granny, don't worry. I know what to do, Yi Fan said as he put the fiery sword on the table behind his back. He turned around and crouched down to look at Fujiwara no Chico inside the giant ice coffin. Chico, be good and wait for me here. Wait for me to come back and save you, Yi Fan said softly as he gently stroked the coffin. Woo! Baihu came to Yi Fan with a reluctant look on her face. Xiao Zhao, stay here. Yi Fan reached out to stroke Baihu's head. Wait for Brother Yi to come back. Baihu rubbed her head affectionately against Yi Fan's palm. Granny, I'm leaving. Yi Fan got up and said to Jin Shan, take care. I'm leaving. Be careful on your way back. Come back early. Jin Shan instructed Yi Fan. Yi Fan nodded and turned around to look at Fujiwara no Chico in the ice coffin. He gritted his teeth and turned around to leave. Woo! Baihu saw Yi Fan leave and immediately jumped into Jin Shan's arms while sobbing. 2 lines of clear tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. Silly girl, don't be sad. Jin Shan stroked Baihu in her arms and said, Brother Ye's life is tough. It'll be fine. Yi Fan left Pear Blossom Palace and directly used his movement technique to fly above the clouds. He quietly floated above a piece of white cloud and gently closed his eyes. He began to condense his spirit energy. He wanted to test how fast he could go at full speed and see if he could reach the extreme north within 2 hours. Wong! Yi Fan's overbearing spirit energy began to rapidly circulate through his meridians. A protective light sphere that was 10 feet in size began to appear around his body. ZZZ. The white light sphere burst out and dazzled the eyes. More than 10 silver lightning bolts shuttled back and forth within the light sphere. Swoosh! When the protective light sphere reached its peak, Yi Fan suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were already filled with 5 colors. Swoosh! Yi Fan's figure instantly disappeared. His speed was so fast that Yi Fan's real body had already rushed out a few hundred feet, but his afterimage was still in the same place. Boom! A white light suddenly appeared and streaked across the sky like a meteor. The speed was so fast that even the air was completely torn apart, letting out a huge roar. It's not fast enough. I can still increase my speed. Yi Fan, who was in the light sphere, began to adjust the pure spirit energy in his chi vessel. Earlier, he had used the spirit energy in his 8 extraordinary meridians and did not use the spirit energy in his chi vessel. He wanted to test his speed at different stages. 1. Yi Fan's spirit energy was at the same time. The moment Yi Fan had the thought, the spirit energy in his chi vessel began to move according to Yi Fan's will. ZZZ. His protective light sphere instantly expanded to 3 feet. Within the silver light sphere, red, purple, white, gold, and green, 5 thick lightning bolts shuttled back and forth, shining without end. Boom, boom, boom. Yi Fan's speed instantly increased by several times. Under his acceleration, 3 shock waves instantly appeared. The huge shock waves scattered the countless clouds around Yi Fan in an instant. Yi Fan forcefully carved out a path of clouds that was more than 10 zhong wide. Such overbearing spirit energy. Such crazy speed. The white clouds around him quickly scattered, and the scenery under his feet passed by at high speed. The overbearing protective light sphere sizzled. Yi Fan's movement technique had been pushed to the limit. The mysterious sky's secret essentials was indeed powerful. Yi Fan never thought that his speed could reach such a level. He had only cultivated to the 2nd level, earth-shattering heavens, and his power was already so great. If he cultivated to the 9th level, wouldn't it be heaven-defying? The mysterious sky's secret essentials had 9 levels, and each level was 10 times faster than the previous level. In other words, the 2nd level was 10 times faster than the 1st level, and the 9th level was hundreds of millions of times faster than the 1st level. Yi Fan finally understood the reaction of the white-robed dragon when his brother Kim gave him the Jiangxia Qi Refinement Essentials on his wedding day. He also finally understood the meaning of the 9 levels. It was very simple, just like the name. The first 4 levels of the mysterious sky's secret essentials were soaring to the heavens, earth-shattering heavens, dragon soaring to the 9th heaven, and moon falling to the heavens. According to the secret essentials, in the first 4 levels, the 3rd level, dragon soaring to the 9th heaven, would welcome the first heavenly tribulation. In the last 5 levels, each level would have a heavenly tribulation. The 5th level, sun in the sky. The 6th level, sun and moon crossing heavens. The 7th level, one hand covering the heavens. The 8th level, their sky beyond sky. The last level, lawless. 6 heavenly tribulations, breaking free from the 6 paths of reincarnation. Chapter 285. Yi Fan did not want to become a saint. His request was very simple. He wanted to live a down-to-earth life with his wife, Fujiwara no Chiko. This life was enough. Yi Fan thought as he hurried along. In the blink of an eye, more than an hour had passed. He had traveled nearly 10,000 miles. But even so, Yi Fan still frowned slightly. More than half the time had passed, but the extreme north still did not enter his sight. He had underestimated this distance. Above the clouds, Yi Fan began to worry. He had already pushed his movement technique to the limit. If he still could not reach the extreme north within 2 hours, then there was only one way. Cultivate the 3rd level of the mysterious sky secrets, dragon ascending 9 heavens. But unless he had no other choice, he did not dare to do this. Under normal circumstances, each level of cultivation required a buffer period of 1 to 3 years. Otherwise, it would be extremely easy for one to go berserk. He had already cultivated to the 2nd level in less than a year and caused the evil energy to devour his mind. If he continued to forcefully cultivate to the 3rd level, he was afraid that he would really become a monster. But this was not what he was most worried about. For his wife, he was willing to die, let alone become a monster. What he was afraid of was the heavenly tribulation. After cultivating the 3rd level, dragon ascending 9 heavens, the first heavenly tribulation would descend. This was not a child's play. The white rogue dragon had cultivated for more than 1,000 years, but he could not withstand the baptism of the heavenly tribulation. If not for the appearance of a Yi clan ancestor, he would have turned into ashes. 1,000 years of cultivation was already like this. He had obtained this cultivation for less than a year. In addition, his heart demon had appeared, and the evil energy was everywhere. How could he safely pass the tribulation? He was not afraid of death. He was afraid that after he died, no one would be able to save his wife. Just as Yi Fan's heart was heavy with worry, a large white glacier entered his line of sight. This scene caused Yi Fan, who was originally depressed, to become inexplicably excited. The extreme north was in front of him. Above the clouds, Yi Fan revealed a childlike smile. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Yi Fan arrived above the extreme north. He slowed down, withdrew his spirit energy, and slowly landed on the ice. Just as Jin Chan had said, the temperature here was extremely low, the cold wind raged, and the environment was very bad. As far as the eye could see, endless glaciers and icebergs stretched as far as the eye could see, and everything was white and translucent. What a world of ice and snow! Boo! The biting cold wind blew Yi Fan's long-distance running shoes, making them flutter in the wind. This was the extreme north, where the soul-returning grass grew. Whether it was a coincidence or the will of the heavens, it took him exactly 2 hours to get here from Pear Blossom Palace. There was no time to lose. He had to find the soul-returning grass quickly. After resting for a while, Yi Fan once again flew up, slowly using spirit manipulation. This time, he had the experience of searching for Xiao Zhao, so he didn't fly too high. Instead, he hovered about 10 feet above the ground and carefully searched for the legendary soul-returning immortal grass. There were glaciers everywhere, and there were many ravines and crevices. If he flew too high, it was easy to miss some dark places. At this time, Yi Fan's eyesight was very good. Nothing within 100 miles could escape his eyes. He first scanned the area within 100 miles, then began to search for all the ravines and crevices within this 100 miles. However, even though his 5 senses were amazing and his movement was swift and fierce, the speed of his search was simply a drop in the bucket for these glaciers that stretched for thousands of miles. There were many ravines and crevices here. He used an entire 2 hours to search only a few dozen miles. Apart from finding some strange animals, he didn't find any plants, let alone the soul-returning grass. At this time, it was already close to noon. The shining ice surface made Yi Fan a little dizzy. He put his hands on his eyes and looked around, then sat down on a protruding piece of ice. It wasn't a good idea to keep searching like this. Yi Fan thought. The glaciers in the extreme north stretched for thousands of miles, and he had only searched a few dozen miles after half a day. This didn't even include the towering ice mountains. If he kept searching like this, not to mention a day, he might not be able to search the entire extreme north in 10 years. What should he do? Yi Fan closed his eyes and frowned as he thought hard. His cultivation wasn't low, and his movement technique was excellent. He had met many powerful experts, but when he was faced with this cold and vast extreme north, he felt helpless. It was a pity that he couldn't split himself. If only he could be like Juju Junichiro. Yi Fan thought of the cat demon Joju from the battle at the ancestral home. At that time, this person only used a strand of hair to transform into a person that looked exactly like him, and the person's cultivation wasn't low. It was a pity that he wasn't a cat demon. Other than his spiritual energy and movement technique, he didn't know any other metaphysical skills. Wait a minute, spiritual energy. Yi Fan suddenly had an idea and immediately stood up. He suddenly thought of an idea. Although he couldn't clone himself, his spiritual energy could. Not only was he full of spiritual energy, he was also extremely skilled in controlling spiritual energy. As long as he willed it, the spiritual energy in his body would instantly react. Since there were so many crevices and ravines here, why not extend his spiritual energy out his body and use it to search for the soul-returning immortal grass? In that case, he wouldn't need to personally check the crevices of the ravines. Whether or not there was an immortal grass, he would know with his spiritual energy. If that was the case, the speed of searching would be at least 10 times faster than before. Let's do it this way. Yi Fan thought of this and immediately used his movement technique to float 100 feet in the air. Huff! Yi Fan closed his eyes and slowly sat cross-legged in the air. It was the same method he used to seal Fengming Mountain with his spiritual energy. This time, he wanted to release his spiritual energy in a larger area. Wong. With a thought from Yi Fan, the spiritual energy in his body immediately reacted. The tyrannical spiritual energy flowed through Yi Fan's 8 extraordinary meridians, bones, and even all 36,000 pores. In the blink of an eye, a dazzling white ball of light appeared around Yi Fan. Wong. After the ball of light appeared, it instantly expanded at an unbelievable speed. Swish! The white ball of light expanded in all directions and finally formed an extremely large ball of spiritual energy. The reason why it was large was because this ball of light was simply too big. Yi Fan was already 100 feet in the air, and the edge of this ball of light was almost touching the ground. Chapter 286. He didn't release all of his spiritual power, but kept half of it in his body. His battle experience was already very rich. After more than 10 battles and losing his spiritual power 3 times, he understood the importance of preserving his strength. In addition, before he left, Jinshan had told him that the soul-returning grass was the king of all herbs. There were many spiritual creatures guarding it, ready to eat it when it bloomed, in order to improve their cultivation and return to the true path. It was necessary to keep half of his spiritual power in his body. He had fought with Inchan Dashyong, the lizard spirit, and knew the power of spiritual creatures. Although this was the extreme north, there were still many creatures living here. If he was not careful, there might be monsters that had already eaten the soul-returning grass. He had to be careful. Swish! Yi Fan, who was high up in the sky, immediately opened his eyes after releasing 50% of his spiritual energy. The moment Yi Fan opened his eyes, countless bolts of 5-colored lightning began to appear on the white ball of light that was filled with spirit energy. They intersected and reflected each other as they shuttled back and forth. The spiritual energy ball had been condensed, and it began to search for the immortal grass. With a thought from Yi Fan, the 5-colored electric lights on the white light ball were released in an instant. They rushed into the countless gullies on the ground with a sizzling sound. At this time, the white light ball was blazing like a bright moon in the sky. On the light ball, red, purple, white, gold, and green electric lights were endless, like thousands of snakes dancing. In the center of the light ball, Yi Fan was sitting cross-legged. He was wearing a white robe with golden threads inlaid with jade, a bronze crown with 9 lotuses on his head, and a pair of dark green cloud boots. His eyes were bright, and his silver hair fluttered in the wind, like a real immortal descending to the mortal world. Sitting cross-legged in the light ball, Yi Fan began to control the spiritual energy ball and slowly moved forward. ZZZZ. On the ice surface, countless 5-colored electric lights probed into every gully and crevice at an extremely fast speed. They didn't miss a single inch of the ice surface. Yi Fan closed his eyes again and carefully sensed the information transmitted to him by every ray of spiritual power. 2 hours later, Yi Fan, who was high up in the sky, withdrew the remaining spiritual power into his body and slowly descended to the ice surface. Even though he had used 50% of his spiritual energy to search a large area, it took him a full 4 hours, but he had only searched a radius of 200 kilometers. Now that the sky was getting dark and the sun was setting, the soul-returning grass would shrink back into the glacier. If he wanted to continue searching, he would have to wait until tomorrow. What he needed to do now was to find some food and a temporary place to stay. Ever since he left for Japan, other than drinking a few cups of sake with Ito Fumio, he hadn't touched a single drop of water or eaten a single grain of rice. Water was not a problem. This was the far north, and there was nothing but ice. Food was not a problem either. Under the thick layer of ice, there were many edible fish. The place to live was even simpler. There was ice everywhere. Just find a random ice block and hollow it out, and you could live in it. Bang! Yi Fan used his palm strength to create a 3-foot-wide hole in the ice layer under his feet. Even though the thinnest part of the ice here was more than 10 feet thick, it was a piece of cake for Yi Fan. After the ice surface shattered, all kinds of fish emerged and greedily breathed in the fresh air outside. Yi Fan stretched out his hand and sucked in his spiritual power. A 1-foot-long fat fish landed in his hand. He had food, but he still lacked utensils to hold it. Without utensils, he couldn't cook at all. If only there was a big rock. Yi Fan thought. If it were anywhere else, he would be able to find a few big rocks with a casual search. However, in the far north, there was ice everywhere, and stones were very rare. Helpless, Yi Fan once again rose into the air and returned hundreds of kilometers away. Only then did he find a big rock that was more than a foot tall and 2 feet wide. After returning here, the sky was completely dark. The sky here was completely different from other skies. Not only were there shining stars, but there was also a kind of colorful light constantly flashing in the sky. It was very spectacular. Yi Fan didn't have the heart to appreciate this rare, beautiful scenery. What he needed to do now was to fill his stomach and have a good rest. Tomorrow, he would continue to look for the soul-returning grass. He first found a 1-foot-tall ice block and then used the distant fire sword in his hand to completely hollow it out. A simple ice house was completed. After Yi Fan went in, he felt that it was not bad. For a person, this ice house was spacious enough. He first used ice to seal the hole, leaving only an air vent. Then he laid out a layer of spiritual power that was more than half a foot thick inside the ice house. This way, he could keep warm. Also, if the iceberg outside collapsed, or if some mountain spirit or wild monster attacked in the middle of the night, he could be prepared. Yi Fan first used his sword to cut a hole in the huge rock he found, making a flat-bottom stone pot. After making the stone pot, Yi Fan dug out a large piece of ice from the ground and put it in the stone pot. After everything was done, Yi Fan began to prepare the fish stew. There was no firewood here, and he didn't bring a fire. However, he had the distant fire sword. Yi Fan picked up the distant fire sword beside him. He didn't even unsheath the sword and directly pointed it at the ice block in the stone pot. Shwa! Yi Fan used his spiritual power to gently urge it. The end of the distant fire sword's scabbard instantly rushed out a red light, and directly rushed into the stone pot. Wah! The ice block in the stone pot first emitted a burst of heat and then began to melt. In the blink of an eye, it melted completely. Gurgle, gurgle. Under Yi Fan's careful urging, the heat released by the distant fire sword turned the ice block into boiling hot water. Yi Fan continued to urge the distant fire sword to continue releasing heat with one hand, while the other hand threw the big fish in. He didn't scrape off the fish's scales. He remembered very clearly that the last time he said that after he took back Fujiwara no Chico from the Zhou residence, the first meal that Fujiwara no Chico made for him was this fish. He didn't scrape off the fish's scales. Not long after he finished cooking the fish, Fujiwara no Chico recovered her memory. This time, he wanted to make a good omen, so he didn't scrape off the fish's scales. He hoped that it would be the same as last time. Soon, his beloved wife would return to his side again. The fish was cooked, and its fragrance filled the air. Yi Fan's eyes were red as he thought of her. Last time, the husband and wife were still joking with each other about the fish soup, but this time they were already separated by life and death. Yi Fan withdrew the distant fire sword and looked at the milky white fish soup with red eyes in a daze. After a long time, Yi Fan reached out and took the fully cooked fish out of the stone pot and ate it in big mouthfuls. He cried as he ate the fish. Big drops of hot tears fell into the fish soup. If he wanted to find the soul returning grass, he had to maintain his physical strength. Yi Fan finished the fish that was more than a foot long. He also drank half of the big pot of fish soup very quickly. After Yi Fan ate and drank to his heart's content, he sat cross-legged and concentrated on cultivating his qi. Although he was still full of spiritual energy, there was still a small gap in his spiritual energy after he had sped up all the way to the soul returning grass. Taking advantage of a night's rest, Yi Fan intended to fill this gap. However, just as he entered the qi refining state, a burst of hurried footsteps entered his ears. Someone was approaching his ice house. Chapter 287. For men. 3 middle-aged men, 1 young man. 2 of the middle-aged men had cultivation, 1 was average, the other had a burning aura. The last one was seriously ill, beyond cure. The young man's aura was steady, and his physique was excellent. The 4 of them were about 200 feet away from here, and were approaching. Yi Fan's 5 senses were amazing, and he came to this conclusion in an instant. He didn't expect that someone would appear in the cold and desolate northernmost land so late at night. People who could come here were definitely not ordinary people. Yi Fan held his breath and waited for the changes. The footsteps of the 4 people were getting closer and closer, and soon they were in front of the ice house. Cough, cough, cough. A middle-aged man coughed. Isn't this just a lump of ice? How could there be people here? Cough, cough, cough. Did you see wrongly? A man who spoke broken Chinese asked, and from his voice, he was definitely not a Han Chinese. I clearly saw a red light flash. I definitely did not see wrongly. Another middle-aged man said, There must be people here. Smell it. There is the smell of fish. Cough, cough. You don't say. There really is the smell of fish. Cough, cough. The patient said while greedily sniffing the fragrance in the air. Friends inside, can you let us in to avoid the cold? The middle-aged man who first smelled the smell of fish said loudly. Yi Fan in the ice house frowned, but did not answer. It seems that the red light, when he activated the Li fire sword, just now attracted them. The aroma of the stewed fish wafted out of the cave through the air vent. These 4 people were of unknown origin, and suddenly appeared in this cold place in the extreme north. Yi Fan did not want to come into contact with people of unknown origin. Cough, 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 this friend, you, please let us in, cough, cough. The patient said while coughing violently and gasping for breath. Let us avoid the cold, cough, cough, cough. Since they are not willing, then let us go. The young man's voice sounded. Crash. In the igloo, Yi Fan pushed aside the ice block blocking the entrance of the cave and slowly walked out of the igloo. From the patient's aura, Yi Fan could tell that this person did not have long to live. He would not be able to hold on for more than a few days. He couldn't refuse the request of a dying man. After Yi Fan came out of the igloo, he began to carefully size up the 4 people. Just as he had expected, there were 3 middle-aged men and a 17 or 18-year-old boy. They were all carrying bags. The first person to smell the fish was a middle-aged man who looked like a Taoist priest. He wore a gray robe and held a horsetail whisk in his hand. His hair was tied up in a high bun with a jade hairpin inserted in it. At the top of the jade hairpin was a pattern of the 8 trigrams. This person's face was thin, but he had a pair of small, bright eyes. Coupled with his mustache and the goatee on his chin, it was obvious that he was not a good person. The person who spoke broken Chinese was dressed like a person from the Western regions. He wore a milky white robe and an apricot yellow vest. His head was wrapped in a thick yellow cloth several times. His pair of clear eyes were bright and full of expression. He carried a yellow cloth bag on his back and a gorgeous curved knife embedded with a ruby at his waist. The person who was constantly coughing seemed to be a rich merchant. His face was haggard and bloodless. His appearance was somewhat nondescript. He wore a silk robe inside and a heavy mink coat on the outside. He wore a fur hat on his head, bearskin gloves on his hands, and a pair of wolfskin boots on his feet. From the beginning until now, this rich merchant had been constantly coughing. Finally, there was the 17 or 18-year-old youth. This youth had a delicate and pretty face and was slightly thin and weak. Although one couldn't see any cultivation base from him, his physique was extremely good. The reason was very obvious. In this extremely cold land of ice and snow in the extreme north, this youth only wore a thin silk gown. While Yifan was sizing up the 4 people, they were also sizing him up. This was especially so for that goateed Taoist. His small eyes kept scanning Yifan's body. Cough, cough, cough. The middle-aged man who was dressed like a rich merchant covered his mouth and constantly coughed. He said in a weak voice, "Sir, can we go and cough, cough, to avoid the cold?" "You can come in," Yifan said with a frown. After saying that, Yifan turned around and entered the igloo. The middle-aged man who was dressed like a rich merchant immediately hurried in. The goateed Taoist followed closely behind. After the middle-aged man and the boy looked at each other, they also stepped in. The originally spacious igloo suddenly seemed a little crowded. After the rich merchant entered the igloo, he went straight to the stone pot. He took out a silver bowl from his bosom and impatiently scooped up a bowl of fish soup from the stone pot and drank it in big gulps. After the goateed Taoist came in, he began to look around. He was very curious about how this silver-haired young man in front of him caught the fish and how he started the fire. That stone pot looked like it was cut out with a sharp sword. The broken stones on the ground were the best evidence. This was strange. One must know that there was only ice here. There was no firewood or stones. Even if he wanted to eat a fish, it was impossible. The ice here was more than 10 feet thick. The fish were all under the ice. If he wanted to eat fish, he had to break the ice. But it was easy to say, but how could it be easy to do? The goateed Taoist's eyes fell on the sword beside Yifan. Li fire sword. When the goateed Taoist saw the appearance of the sword, his eyes instantly lit up. Although his cultivation was not very good, he still knew a lot about divine weapons. He had once seen the record of the Li fire sword in an ancient book. It was a real, peerless divine weapon. Its power was unprecedented. He originally thought that this sword was just an imaginary thing of the ancients, some illusory legend. However, when the real Li fire sword appeared in front of him, he understood that the records in the ancient book were all true. The red light he saw just now was emitted by this sword. The goateed Taoist suppressed his beating heart. With a calm expression, he put the bag on his back on the ground and sat down cross-legged. The Western man and the boy also came in. After the two entered the igloo, they quickly used the ice on the ground to block the door and then sat down. "Sir, please," the Western man said in broken Chinese while taking out a piece of dried meat from the bag and respectfully handed it to Yifan. "No need to be polite," Yifan said indifferently and reached out his hand to decline. "I have already eaten." Chapter 288. "I'm not hungry, Uncle Sika." The youth waved his hand at the Western region man. "You can keep it for yourself." The Western region man helplessly curled his lips and began to eat. Taoist, cough, 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 come and drink the fish soup. After drinking several large bowls of fish soup, the rich merchant's face regained some color. He sat down heavily on the bag and called the goatee over. The goatee got up and took the silver bowl from the rich merchant's hand and began to drink the fish soup. Yi Fan expressionlessly observed the four people. It was clear that the four people were not together. It was obvious from the food. The rich merchant only called for the goatee to drink the soup and did not let the Western region man and the youth go over. The Western region man only gave the dried meat to himself and the youth, not to the other two. Little Kuhan Ru greet Senior. The youth bowed slightly to Yi Fan sitting across from him. Thank you, Senior, for taking us in. No need to be so polite. Yi Fan said. He had a good impression of the youth and the Western region man. The two of them did not drink the fish soup without his permission like the rich merchant and the goatee did. Yi Fan was very particular about etiquette and naturally had a good impression of polite people. This is Uncle Sakitu. The youth introduced the Western region man to Yi Fan. We met on the road. The Western region man nodded to Yi Fan. Yi Fan nodded back. I didn't expect to meet people from my hometown in the wilderness of the extreme north. The youth said, You are with them? Yi Fan asked. The youth glanced at the rich merchant and the Taoist priest and shook his head. Indeed, as Yi Fan had expected, they were not in cahoots. Mr. Cough Cough, the middle-aged man said, My surname is Qian, and I'm from Huainan. This Taoist priest's Taoist name is Su Wei. This time, the two of us came to the extreme north to find the soul-returning grass and save my old life. The Taoist priest who was drinking the soup turned his head to look at Yi Fan. He was observing Yi Fan's reaction. Yi Fan was expressionless. From a moment he saw these four people, Yi Fan had already guessed most of their identities. The people who came to the northernmost glacier were definitely not here to look at the scenery. 80% of them were here for the soul-returning grass. Seeing no reaction from Yi Fan, Goatee once again turned his head to drink the fish soup. What about you guys? Yi Fan asked the youth. Are you also looking for the soul-returning grass? The young man shook his head. To tell you the truth, I'm here to seek immortality. Seeking immortality? Yi Fan had a puzzled look on his face. Since ancient times, there had been countless people who had been searching for immortality. It wasn't a rare thing. However, those people who had been searching for immortality had often gone to some remote mountains and forests, or spiritual mountains and great rivers to search for immortality. He had never heard of anyone coming to the extreme north to search for immortality. The young man nodded. Yi Fan's reaction was within his expectations. Are there immortals here? Yi Fan asked. Cold winds raged in the extreme north. There were glaciers and icebergs everywhere. Not to mention immortals, even humans couldn't survive here. Yes, the young man nodded firmly. I think you've gone crazy from wanting to find an immortal. Goatee let out a loud burp. As he spoke, he sat down. I wonder which immortal is waiting for you here. Great Emperor Zhenwu of the North, the young man said seriously. Great Emperor Zhenwu? Ha ha! Goatee laughed maniacally. You're such an interesting child. If you want to see Great Emperor Zhenwu, go to the Taoist temple to pay your respects. Why did you come to this godforsaken place? The young man pursed his lips and glanced at Goatee. He didn't reply. What about this senior? Are you also here to look for the soul-returning grass? Yi Fan asked the man from the west as he pushed the stone pot in front of the two. Uncle Sakitu came here to find an ice snake, the young man said. Ice snake? Yi Fan asked, puzzled. The man from the west, named Sakitu, nodded. Uncle Sakitu once caught a fire snake in the southwest desert and obtained its inner core. Who would have thought that after swallowing it, the inner core in his body would backfire? Every noon, his whole body would burn and the pain would be unbearable. The young man looked at Sakitu and said, Later on, I heard that there was a 1,000-year-old ice snake in the extreme north. If you can obtain its inner core, the heat in Uncle Sakitu's body will be cured. Sakitu nodded. He stretched out his hand and lifted the stone pot in front of him with one hand. Bang! Flames instantly appeared in Sakitu's hand. The remaining fish soup in the stone pot immediately began to boil. Yifan frowned slightly. No wonder he felt the heat in the man from the west. So this was the reason. At this point, the four people's goals were clear. The young man wanted to find immortals. The man from the west wanted to catch an ice snake, and Goatee and the merchant wanted to find the soul-returning grass. Senior, what about you? The young man asked Yifan. What are you doing here? Soul-returning grass. Yifan glanced at Goatee and the merchant as he spoke. Goatee heard these three words and frowned slightly. He instinctively looked up at Yifan. Their eyes met. Yifan saw a flash of murderous intent in Goatee's eyes. Goatee, on the other hand, felt a bone-chilling coldness in Yifan's eyes. The merchant was stunned. He even stopped coughing. There was a competitor. Goatee began to feel complicated. The young man in front of him was strange. He was young but had a head of silver hair. He was surrounded by cold air and had a divine weapon in his hand. If it was a one-on-one fight, Goatee was no match for this person. It seemed that he could not attack by force. He could only use his wits. Haha, so you're a kindred spirit. Goatee laughed. It doesn't matter. This extreme North Glacier is so big. There must be more than one soul-returning grass. Yifan smiled and did not comment. Senior, why are you looking for this soul-returning grass? The young man asked. To save my wife. Yifan said. So it's like that. The young man nodded. It's getting late. Let's all rest. When his beloved wife was mentioned, Yifan became silent again. He leaned his head on the Everflame sword and slowly closed his eyes. Seeing Yifan fall asleep, the four people did not speak and went to rest. The Everflame sword was constantly emitting heat in the ice house. With Yifan's spirit energy wrapped around them, the exhausted people quickly fell asleep. However, there was one person who did not sleep. That was Yifan. The situation was far more complicated than he had imagined. He originally thought that with his current cultivation, he could quickly find the soul-returning grass. Now it seemed that it was not so simple. Now with the addition of a competitor, the situation was even more difficult. It seemed that he had to hurry tomorrow. He had to find the soul-returning grass before Goatee. The night was silent. In the early morning of the next day, before the sky was bright, everyone got up early. Goatee told the merchant to stay here and wait for him. Then he went out alone. It was clear that he planned to go out alone to find his soul-returning grass. He would come back here at night. The Western man had his head down and was packing his bags. The young man, standing to the side, secretly gave Yifan a look, indicating for him to come out and talk. Chapter 289. Senior, the youth lowered his voice and said to Yifan, there is one thing I must remind you of. You must be careful of those two. The youth said, glancing at the ice house vigilantly. Which two? Yifan calmly asked. That Taoist and that rich merchant. The youth lowered his voice and whispered to Yifan, those two are not good people. What happened? Yifan asked again. Senior, you don't need to ask, just be careful, the youth said, cupping his hands and bowing to Yifan. I will now accompany Uncle Situ to find the ice snake. Senior, take care of yourself. I hope you can find the soul-returning immortal grass soon. Although the young man was young, he was well-educated and well-mannered, exuding a sense of experience. Yifan nodded. To be honest, this youth's personality was very similar to his temperament. He was young and polite. What was even more precious was that he didn't do his own things and instead helped people unrelated to him to find the ice snake. He even reminded him to be careful of bad people. This kind of heart was very rare. I also hope you can find the ice snake soon and see great Emperor Jinwu, Yifan said to the youth. The youth smiled and turned around to enter the ice house. Then he walked out with the Western man. After waving goodbye to Yifan, the two continued to head north and soon disappeared into the wind and snow. At this time, the sky was beginning to brighten. Yifan was eager to find the grass and once again soared into the sky. Yesterday, he had already searched through all the crevices in the ice within a radius of 200 miles. Today, he began to search all the ice mountains within a radius of 200 miles. First, he flew to the peak of the ice mountain. Then, he used his spiritual energy to search the entire ice mountain inch by inch. The surging spiritual energy surged down the ice mountain and crazily drilled into every crevice, searching for the legendary soul returning immortal grass. When Yi Fan returned to the sky above the ice house, the sky had already turned completely dark. He had not stopped for the entire day, frantically searching through all the glaciers and icebergs within a radius of 500 miles. In the end, he still found nothing. If he couldn't find it today, he would look for it tomorrow. He could search 250 kilometers in a day. Even if this northernmost glacier had a radius of 10,000 kilometers, he could finish searching in 20 days at most. Yi Fan encouraged himself. However, just as he was about to descend and return to the ice, the conversation in the ice house caught his attention. It was a conversation between the goateed Taoist priest and the rich merchant. What about Sakitu and that child? The goateed Taoist priest sounded exasperated. He's gone. What's wrong? It was the voice of the rich merchant. Gone? When did you leave? The goateed Taoist asked. This morning. What's wrong? The merchant asked. This is bad. What happened? Now I know why that child doesn't eat, said the Taoist with the goatee. What's the matter? The merchant did not know why the goatee suddenly mentioned this. This child must have taken the non-disease grass. That's why he can maintain his physical strength without eating, said the goateed Taoist priest. Non-disease grass. The merchant's voice was a little surprised. This non-disease grass is one of the 6 immortal herbs. Although it can't bring people back to life like the soul returning immortal grass, if a person takes it, all diseases will disappear and they will become young again. Even if they don't drink or eat, they will still be like a normal person, the goatee said with annoyance. I said this kid is so young, but so experienced. After all this time, he's not a child at all. Maybe he's even older than you and me added together. All diseases will disappear, become young again. Cough, cough, cough. The merchant's voice was a little excited, and he coughed again. These 2 words were too tempting for him. I've counted your lifespan. You won't live more than 10 days, the goatee said to the merchant in a low voice. After 10 days, I'm afraid you'll go see the king of hell. Taoist priest, cough, cough, cough. Taoist priest, save me, cough, cough. The merchant's voice began to sound like he was about to cry. A group of more than 100 of us traveled thousands of miles to come here. Now, only you and I are left. Taoist priest, please think of a way to save me. Boo-hoo. The merchant began to cry as he said this. Don't cry. Let me ask you, do you want to live or die? The goatee asked the merchant. I want to live, the merchant said with a sobbing voice. If you want to live, then listen to me, the goatee said darkly. Taoist priest, do you have any good ideas? After hearing the goatee's words, a glimmer of hope rose in the merchant's heart. That Sacitus suffers from the fire's backlash every noon. He needs to rest for at least 4 hours to recover his strength. He can't go far, the goatee said to the merchant. If we hurry through the night, we can catch up to them in less than a day. Catch up to them? The merchant asked in confusion. What for? Kill them, the goatee said fiercely. Killing them. The merchant's voice began to stutter. Since that brat took the fadeless grass, we'll use his flesh to save your life. The goatee's voice began to sound murderous. That Sacitu doesn't have the fortune to enjoy the fire pill. He might as well help me. Use his blood, flesh to save me. The merchant stuttered. How? It's very simple. The goatee put his face in front of the merchant and said word by word, Eat him. Eat him, ugh. The merchant was stunned when he heard the goatee's words. Then, he immediately retched. The goatee laughed strangely. Don't he like to eat raw seafood? Human flesh tastes much better than that. Yi Fan, who was in mid-air, frowned. It seemed that the young man was right. These 2 people were really not good people. After I take the fire pill and my power increases, I'll come back to find that white-haired brat. I'll take the fire sword from his hand and suck his spiritual energy dry. The goatee laughed. At that time, My cultivation will be heaven-defying, and I'll have a heavenly weapon in hand. Then, I'll become your—" At this point, the goatee stopped abruptly. "Become me?" the merchant asked cautiously. "Become my what?" Then I'll take you back." The goatee's expression changed, and he explained. "You cough, you're talking nonsense." The merchant saw through the goatee's sinister intentions. He coughed and said loudly, "You're not trying to save me. Cough, cough, cough. You want to change into my appearance and go back." The merchant was so angry that he started to gasp for breath. Chapter 290. You, cough, cough, cough. The rich merchant was so angry by the goatee that his entire body trembled, and he coughed incessantly. "Look at you, TSK, TSK, TSK. Your family's wealth is like a mountain, and you have a group of beautiful wives and concubines. You really make others envious." The goatee shook his head and curled his lips as he looked at the angry rich merchant. "But what a pity, what a pity. You don't know the art of controlling women, and your body was sucked dry by those beautiful wives and concubines, turning into a pot of medicine. To tell you the truth, if it wasn't for me feeding you pills from time to time, you would have died long ago. How could you still be alive? You're so vicious." The rich merchant angrily cursed. "I'm vicious. Umph." The goatee sneered. "A great man must be ruthless. You're not vicious? If you're not vicious, where would your wealth come from? If you're not vicious, where would your beautiful wives and concubines come from? Umph, what a joke. You cough, cough." The rich merchant's face turned red, and he coughed incessantly. "The heavens really take care of me. Although I didn't find the soul-returning grass, I met the person who ate the pain-returning grass, and the Western barbarian who ate the intense flame pill, and the silver-haired brat who held the distant flame sword. The goatee laughed. "I first killed the barbarian to take the intense flame pill. Then I killed the one, surnamed Han, and ate his flesh and blood. Once my power increased, I'll come back and kill the silver-haired brat and take the distant flame sword. Then I'll change into your appearance and go back to enjoy your wealth, beautiful wives and concubines. Ha ha." When the goatee said this, he threw his head back and laughed. In the air, Yifan's face was ice cold as he slowly pulled out the snake shadow sword from his waist. Neither of the two people below were good people. One was surnamed Qian and did all kinds of evil for money. The other's name was Empty, but he was more hypocritical than anyone else. This kind of person, everyone had the right to kill. Today, he would send them to see the king of hell. Shua! Yifan, who was floating in the air, suddenly swung the snake's shadow sword down. Boom! A white arc of light as thick as a bowl shot out from the snake's shadow sword and instantly rushed to the top of the igloo 1,000 feet away. Bang! When the hollow igloo met with the cold air from the snake's shadow sword, it instantly froze into a huge, transparent, solid ice block. Within the ice, the rich merchant was still coughing. As for that goatee, he still maintained his posture of facing the sky and laughing heartily. There are two less scourges in the world now, Yifan thought as he struck the frozen igloo with his palm across the air. Bang! The ice shattered, and ice shards scattered in all directions. The huge ice lump instantly turned into red and white ice foam. It's a pity that the stone pot is still inside, Yifan thought. This time I can't stew the fish. I can only roast the fish. He put the snake's shadow sword back on his waist, and then his figure slowly rose, leaving this place. After a while, Yifan flew to the mountainside of a tall iceberg. He used the flaming sword to cut a large semicircular hole in the middle of the mountain. This place was far away from the surface, so it was far away from the human world. After the ice cave was finished, Yifan returned to the surface. He used the old method to take a foot-long fat fish and brought it back to the ice cave. Then he used the sheathed flaming sword to skewer the fish from head to tail. After skewering the fish, Yifan held the hilt of the flaming sword and carefully activated it. Under the activation of his spiritual power, the flaming sword's scabbard emitted a faint red light. Chi! Under the heat of the flaming sword, The fat fish on the scabbard began to emit a fragrant smell. "It's been hard on you, flaming sword. Yesterday, I asked you to help me stew the fish. Today, I ask you to help me roast the fish," Yi Fan said to the flaming sword in his hand. In this world, besides Yi Fan, there was no one else who used a divine weapon to roast fish or stew fish. After eating the fish, Yi Fan broke off a piece of ice from the wall and put it in his mouth. He began to chew. He didn't have a stone pot, so he could only chew on the ice. In fact, if he wanted to drink hot water, there was a way. As long as he held the ice in his hand and then condensed the heat of the flaming sword in his hand, he could drink hot water. But he found it troublesome. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Yi Fan wiped his mouth with his long sleeve and leaned his body against the ice wall. His eyes looked at the sky, full of stars, lost in thought. At most, in 20 days, he would be able to find the soul-returning grass. Yi Fan looked at the dark sky outside and thought, at that time, he would be able to reunite with his beloved wife. He thought that after saving his beloved wife, he would find a way to find Nieching and ask him for 100 herbs pill to let Xiao Zhao return to her human body. Nieching was Eldritch's best friend in his previous life, so he would definitely help him. Thinking about Xiao Zhao, who was already in Baihu's body, Yi Fan couldn't help but feel his heart ache. Xiao Zhao's feelings for him were no less than Fujiwara no Chico's feelings for him. He was well aware of this. However, feelings were strange. Yi Fan only had feelings for Xiao Zhao as a brother and sister, but not as a woman. His only true love was Fujiwara no Chico and no one else. But even so, Xiao Zhao's position in his heart was still irreplaceable. In order to wait for him, she waited alone in the Lingyun cave for 300 years. In order to save him, she didn't hesitate to sacrifice her life and use her life origin Niden. What kind of support could make a woman wait for 300 years? What kind of courage could make a fox immortal who had finally turned into a human use her life origin Niden to save someone else's life? No one could do it except for Xiao Zhao. Silly girl. Yi Fan muttered to himself as his eyes turned red again. Fujiwara no Chico, Baihu Xiao Zhao. These two women had already become the two most important women in his life. For these two women, he was willing to pay any price. Yi Fan thought as he took out the things that Xiao Zhao had given him. A transparent bead with water lingering around it, a small bag of sand, a withered branch, and a small fiery red stone. Yi Fan placed these things on the ice. He didn't know why Xiao Zhao had given him these things. Just as Yi Fan placed these things down, water vapor immediately rose from the ice. The fiery red stone the size of a pigeon egg began to slowly sink into the ice. Yi Fan frowned as he picked up the red stone and carefully examined it in his hand. This stone was warm to the touch. It was indeed different from ordinary stones. When Xiao Zhao had given these things to him, he had been thinking of taking revenge on enchantment, so he didn't care at all. Only now did Yi Fan understand that since Xiao Zhao had given these things to him, it meant that these things were definitely not ordinary. Thinking of this, Yi Fan held the stone in his palm and carefully used his spiritual power to activate it. Chapter 291. What was even more surprising was that although the flame on the stone was fierce, his hand was not damaged at all. It was indeed not an ordinary object. Yi Fan was shocked. He held the stone tightly in his hand and increased his spiritual energy to 5%. Then he pushed the stone in his hand towards the entrance of the cave. Whoosh! A red pillar of fire, 1 foot thick, rushed out of the cave and into the air. The pillar of fire was actually more than 10 feet long. The raging flames illuminated the ice cave in a bright red color. The tyrannical heat melted the ice walls of the ice cave by more than half a foot. The entire ice cave became steaming hot in an instant. Good treasure. Yi Fan retracted his spiritual energy and looked at the fire stone in his hand as he blurted out. Since this stone was a treasure, then the other 3 items must be extraordinary as well. Yi Fan thought as he held the translucent bead in his hand. A miraculous scene appeared. When Yi Fan held the bead in his hand, the boiling water vapor in the cave began to slowly disperse. Within 3 feet of Yi Fan, there was not a trace of water vapor. Not only that, even the ice water that was melted by the pillar of fire began to recede, forming a 3 feet wide circle of water under his feet. This treasure can repel water, Yi Fan said in surprise. If it could repel water without the use of spiritual energy, then what if it was activated with spiritual energy? Yi Fan wanted to know how strong the water-repelling ability of the water-repelling bead was, so he began to slowly activate it with his spiritual energy. Buzz! The water-repelling bead in Yi Fan's hand flashed under the activation of his spiritual energy, and the whole body lit up. Whoosh! The ice water under Yi Fan's feet and the mist in the cave quickly dispersed and was expelled out of the cave. Crack, crack, crack. Along with the crisp sound, countless fine cracks began to appear on the walls of the ice cave. Yi Fan immediately retracted his spiritual energy. This water-repelling bead could not only repel water vapor and liquid water, it could even repel solid ice. If he continued to use his spiritual power, not to mention the ice cave, even the ice mountain would collapse. What a great water-repelling pearl! Yi Fan exclaimed in admiration as he looked at the brilliant pearl in his hand. With this divine artifact, not only could he fly into the sky, he could also enter the sea. Yi Fan put away the water avoidance pearl and the blazing firestone, and then excitedly picked up the withered branch. As usual, he first used a small amount of spiritual energy to stimulate it. Crack! Crack! As soon as Yi Fan's spiritual energy entered the withered branch in his palm immediately stretched, grew branches, sprouted, grew leaves, and bloomed. In the blink of an eye, an inconspicuous withered branch turned into a small tree that was more than 3 feet long and full of blooming flowers. It does look good, but I don't know what use it has, Yi Fan thought as he withdrew his spiritual power. Chico liked to look at flowers, and these flowers were much more beautiful than cherry blossoms. She would definitely like them. Yi Fan did not know the mystery of this motherwood, and thought it was just beautiful. Little did he know that among these treasures, the most precious one was this motherwood. One had to know that this motherwood was the spiritual root of the earth, the essence of the wood. It could absorb the essence of the earth, and was an extremely rare treasure. If a cultivator obtained this item, there was hope for them to pass the tribulation and ascend. This motherwood had thousands of magical uses, and testing spiritual power was only one of them. However, if one wanted to test spiritual power, they had to plant it in the soil, or else it would not bloom. However, Yi Fan's spiritual power was too strong, and the motherwood blossomed in his hand. After the spiritual power was withdrawn, the mother would return to normal. Yi Fan put it in his bosom and picked up the last treasure, the small bag with yellow sand. The bag was the size of a palm, an apricot yellow. After opening it, there was a small handful of golden sand inside. What was this thing used for? Yi Fan thought as he poured the sand from the bag into his hand. Sha! As soon as the golden sand was in Yi Fan's hand, it immediately condensed into a shiny golden lump of soil. It was like a piece of gold, and it was heavy in his hand. Just like before, Yi Fan began to use his spiritual power to slowly stimulate it. Bang! Under the stimulation of Yi Fan's spiritual power, the golden lump of soil in his hand instantly turned into a half-foot golden sand ball, suspended 1 foot above Yi Fan's palm, and rotated continuously. Yi Fan slightly adjusted the spiritual power in his hand, and the sand dune suspended in his palm also changed according to the strength of Yi Fan's spiritual power. It was very sensitive. What magical use could this yellow sand have? Yi Fan stared at the golden sand ball floating in his hand as he racked his brains. What could the yellow sand do? Make clay figurines? Ball of mud? Yi Fan pinched his chin and began to think. Shwa! Just as he was puzzled by the yellow sand, the golden sand ball in his hand suddenly split into two. One half turned into a round golden mud ball, and the other half turned into a golden clay figurine with a head, legs, and arms. The scene in front of him made Yi Fan, who was used to seeing treasures, flabbergasted. He was speechless for a long time. He had only casually thought about it, and this golden sandball was able to immediately shape the figurine in his mind into its original form. This was too inconceivable. Let's try again. Yi Fan closed his eyes and began to imagine the appearance of the snake's shadow sword at his waist. The round ball in his palm quickly merged with the clay figurine and then gradually grew in shape. Finally, it turned into a golden treasure sword. Other than the color, the hilt, the blade, and the length were exactly the same as the snake's shadow sword. It was indeed like this. After Yi Fan opened his eyes, he cried out in surprise again. This golden sand was actually able to communicate with his mind. What a magical treasure. Good. I want to see how great your ability is. Yi Fan thought in his heart and began to use his mind to control the golden sand. Under the control of Yi Fan's mind, the golden sand began to transform into all kinds of things. Tables, chairs, benches, pavilions, sabers, spears, swords, halberds, hatchets, hooks, and forks. As long as it was something that could be imagined, the golden sand could easily transform into anything. What made Yi Fan even more surprised was that the amount of the golden sand could automatically increase and decrease according to the amount of spiritual power he used. In other words, as long as Yi Fan wanted to, building a golden earthen building that was dozens of feet wide was just a matter of an instant. Yi Fan withdrew the spiritual power from his hand, and the golden sand returned to its original size of a few inches. He put the sand back into his pocket, and then put the pocket back into his arms. If he guessed correctly, these things should be the treasures that Xiao Zhao's martial uncles gave to her, and Xiao Zhao gave all these treasures to him. Yi Fan thought as he lay down on the ice. He put his arms behind his head and slowly closed his eyes. The sky had not yet brightened, but Yi Fan had already gotten up early. He stood at the edge of the cave, which was hundreds of feet high, and looked calmly to the east. He was waiting for the sun to rise. Chapter 292. He had to cherish his time and search for the soul return grass as much as possible. Buzz! When Yi Fan was about 1,000 feet away from the ground, he quickly mobilized 50% of his spiritual energy and condensed a huge spiritual energy ball again. Red, purple, white, gold, and blue, countless five-colored electric lights gushed out from the spiritual energy ball and madly rushed into every crevice on the ground. The morning passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was already noon. High in the air, Yi Fan felt his mouth dry up, and his eyes were somewhat dry due to the sunlight reflecting off the ice. He slowly withdrew his spiritual energy and landed on the ground. First, he needed to rest and drink some water. Second, he needed to let his dry eyes recover. He sat on a protruding piece of ice, then casually broke off a piece of ice and put it in his mouth to chew. He woke up earlier today than yesterday, and in the morning he had searched all the ice mountains and ice trenches within a radius of 300 miles. At this rate, he would be able to find the legendary soul return grass in less than 20 days. Bang! Just as Yi Fan was chewing on the ice and thinking, a loud noise suddenly came from the east. Yi Fan stopped chewing and turned his head to look to the east. An ice mountain blocked his line of sight. Perhaps it was the sound of an ice mountain collapsing. Yi Fan thought that the difference in temperature between day and night was not small, so it was normal for ice mountains to collapse. He thought as he turned his head and continued chewing on the ice. Bang! Another loud noise came. This time, the noise was louder than the previous one. Roar! The roar of an animal followed. Yi Fan furrowed his brows and stood up from the block of ice. He could tell that this roar could not have been made by an ordinary animal. The largest animal he had seen here was a white bear that was over 10 feet tall, but the roar of a white bear was not as loud as this. This roar reminded him of the day in the ancestral home, when the white-robed dragon summoned the water dragon. Could it be? Yi Fan suddenly remembered that young man and the western man, Sassitu. It was the ice snake. They found the ice snake. That roar just now must have come from that 1,000-year-old ice snake. It seemed that they were in trouble. Pooh! Yifan spat out the ice cube in his mouth and immediately used his movement technique to leap up. He flew high into the sky and rapidly headed in the direction of the sound. In midair, Yifan quickly focused his vision and looked into the distance while using his movement technique. However, the scene 50 kilometers away shocked Yifan so much that he furrowed his brows. 100 miles away, the young man was running for his life with the Western Region man on his back. Behind them, a giant white snake that was over 30 feet thick and over 1,000 feet long was hot on their heels. What huge snake! Its white eyes were about 3 feet long, and its blood-red pupils were filled with killing intent. The white scales on its body sparkled under the sunlight, and its thick and huge body quickly slid across the ice, leaving a shocking and deep trench in its wake. Whoosh whoosh! How is this a snake? Yifan exclaimed. This was simply an ice dragon. Looking at the two people again, the young man carried the Western Region man on his back, constantly jumping and dodging. It could be seen that the young man's movement technique was very powerful. Even while carrying a living person, his steps were still light and agile. On the other hand, Sasato, who was on his back, did not seem to be faring so well. His expression was pained, and his entire body was red like burning charcoal. A faint red light could be seen coming out of his chest. Yifan understood that it was noon. The young man had told him that Sasato would trigger a backlash from the intense fire pill in his body at 1:15 noon. The pain would be so intense that it would seep into his bones. It was true. The gigantic ice snake slithered rapidly on the wide ice surface, the scales on its body making rustling sounds. The young man used his body to his advantage to burrow into the narrow ice trench. Although the ice snake was fast, it would not be able to catch them in a short time. Seeing this, the ice snake flew into a rage out of humiliation. It constantly slammed its huge head and tail into the ice trench, trying to bury the two people with the collapsing ice. In the blink of an eye, ice rain fell and rumbled. They soon reached the end of the ice trench. The young man frowned. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and leaped onto the ice surface. The ice snake behind him was twisting its huge body in the ice trench. At this moment, it was less than 20 feet away from the two people. Put me down. Don't care about me. Sasato, who was on the young man's back, said weakly in the young man's ear. You hurry, run. Shut up. The young man yelled at Sakitu as he picked up his pace. However, no matter how fast he was not as fast as the 1,000-year-old ice snake. Bang! The giant ice snake rushed out of the ice trench. It stopped, straightened its head, straightened its neck, and roared at the sky. Roar! The ice snake's roar was deafening. After roaring, the ice snake lowered its head and suddenly charged forward. Put me down. Sasato's voice was getting weaker and weaker. It was already 1:15 noon. The heat from the fire pill in his body began to wreak havoc. In the past, every time this happened, the young man would take a piece of ice and then crush it and carefully feed it to him. He would use the cold energy of the ice to suppress the heat in Sasato's body. However, today, he was helpless and could not do anything. The young man's forehead began to sweat. It was not that he was physically weak, but that he was extremely anxious. If he did not feed Sasato the ice, Sasato would very likely die from internal combustion. However, if he stopped to feed him, the two of them would become food for the ice snake behind them. What made him feel even more hopeless was that at this moment, there was nothing in front of him that could block his path. In this way, the ice snake behind them could swallow them in the blink of an eye. When it rains, it pours. When the boat is late, it encounters a gust of wind. It seemed that today was the day the two of them died. The young man thought. He did not expect to die before he could complete his quest for immortality. It was a pity that no one would cry for him. So be it. Since ancient times, who did not die? When a young man thought of this, he immediately stopped. He placed Sasato, who had fainted, on the ice behind him. Then he turned around and looked calmly at the ice snake that was about to arrive. The ice snake behind him did not expect the young man to suddenly stop. It was stunned at first, but then it immediately spread out the scales under its abdomen and stopped 10 feet in front of the young man. Whoosh! The giant ice snake stood up high and spread out the 2 fleshy wings on its neck. It was like a giant dragon looking down at the young man below. Chapter 293. Phew! The ice snake's cold breath was more than 100 feet long. Whoosh! As soon as the cold breath fell, the ground looked like it was raining ice. Life is what I want. Righteousness is also what I want. I can't have both, so I'm willing to sacrifice my life for righteousness. The young man's expression didn't change as he faced the huge ice snake. He slowly sat down cross-legged as he spoke. Hiss! The 3-foot-long blood-red snake's tongue flickered. The huge snake tilted its head, as if wondering why the young man didn't run away, but sat there waiting for death. Just as the young man was about to close his eyes and wait for death, Yi Fan's loud voice came from the sky. What a good sacrifice! The echoes were endless, resounding through the heavens. After the young man heard it, he immediately looked up into the sky. Not only him, but the ice snake also raised its huge head and looked up into the sky. Yi Fan, who wore a copper crown and had snow-white hair, slowly descended from the sky. He had a long sword on his back, and his white robe fluttered in the wind. He looked like a real immortal. It's you, Senior. The young man's face lit up as he stood up from the ground. He never expected that the silver-haired young man who took them in that day would have such a cultivation level. Don't call me Senior, Yi Fan said to the young man with a smile as he landed on the ice. You've eaten the aneurysm grass. Now, you become a young man. Am I wrong? Yi Fan's words hit the nail on the head. The young man's body shook, and he was stunned on the spot. He had indeed eaten the aneurysm grass when he was 60 years old. However, he had never mentioned it to anyone else. How did this young man know? Could this person be? This person was the Zhenwu Great Emperor who had instructed him to come to the extreme north to find him in his dream. Disciple greets Emperor Zhenwu. Han Ru's knees went weak as he knelt in front of Yi Fan and kowtowed 3 times. He thought that Yi Fan was the Zhenwu Great Emperor. Zhenwu Great Emperor? Yi Fan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This young man thought that he was the Zhenwu Great Emperor. Don't talk nonsense. I'm not Emperor Zhenwu, Yi Fan quickly explained. You really aren't? The young man raised his head and asked. I think you've read too many weird stories, Yi Fan said with a smile. If I really was the real Wu Jun, why would I be looking for the soul-returning grass? Then you are. The young man stood up and asked in confusion. My name is Yi Fan, Yi as in the night, Fan as in the ordinary. Yi Fan told the young man his identity. Yi Fan. The youth lowered his head and thought for a moment before blurting out. You're from the Yi family. Let's cut to the chase. Take him to the side and perform the rescue. I'll deal with this guy, Yi Fan said, turning to face the ice serpent. Senior. Oh no. The young man quickly corrected himself. Mr. Yi, be careful. Yi Fan turned his head and nodded at the young man. The young man picked up the unconscious Sakitu and brought him to lie down more than 100 feet away. Then, he held Sakitu's head with one hand and used the other to pick up some ice shards before putting them into Sakitu's mouth. On the other side, a man and a serpent stood facing each other. On this vast and boundless ice surface, they were extremely eye-catching. Hand over the inner core, and I'll spare your life, Yi Fan said calmly to the ice serpent. Roar! The giant ice serpent seemed to understand what Yi Fan said. It raised its head and roared, its voice reaching the heavens. In the past 1,000 years, no less than 100 people had come to the northernmost glacier to retrieve its inner core. Without exception, all of them had become its food. Now that it heard Yi Fan asking it to spit out its inner core, it felt extremely humiliated. If you don't hand it over, then don't blame me for being rough. Swoosh! Before Yi Fan could finish his words, the ice serpent attacked first. It swept its huge snake tail at the ice beneath it. Boom! Countless gigantic ice cubes suddenly exploded and came crashing down on Yi Fan from all directions. Swoosh! Yi Fan moved and instantly disappeared from his original spot. Boom! The ice shards that exploded piled up the place where Yi Fan had been standing a moment ago into a small mountain. Swoosh! Yi Fan's figure instantly appeared 1,000 feet in the air. However, Yi Fan's thinking was too simple. This ice snake had cultivated for more than 1,000 years and had already developed spiritual intelligence. It had long seen through the thoughts of humans. The moment Yi Fan disappeared from his original spot, it abruptly grew to a height of 1,000 feet. It was all for the sake of looking down from above with an irresistible force. Yi Fan grew 1,000 feet in height, and the giant serpent also grew 1,000 feet in height. Yi Fan did not expect the giant serpent to be so fast. Therefore, the moment he appeared 1,000 feet in the air, the giant serpent's bloody mouth, which was more than 10 feet wide, came crashing down on him. This was a well-tested move against the giant serpent. For 1,000 years, the people who came to the extreme north to capture it were all Buffon. Among them, there was no lack of expert cultivators. However, there were very few people who could escape this move. Most people would only realize that they had delivered themselves to the giant serpent's mouth after they were in the air. However, the ice serpent was wrong. The person in front of it was not just anyone. He was Yi Fan, eldritch reincarnation of Yi Fan. Just as the giant snake was about to pounce on him with its bloody mouth, Yi Fan's figure moved. He executed a peerless movement technique and disappeared once again with a whoosh. Bang! The ice serpent's huge mouth instantly closed and made a loud sound. Yi Fan had already appeared under the ice serpent's head, at its neck. Today, I'll disembowel you. As Yi Fan thought about this, he pulled out the blazing sword from his back with a whoosh. Chapter 294. Wong. The roar of a tiger and a dragon could be heard. A red light flashed and heat rose. Yi Fan unsheathed his ever-fire sword. Swoosh! Once the treasured sword was unsheathed, Yi Fan shook the long sword in his hand and stabbed it towards the ice snake's throat. This move was simple and direct. Coupled with Yi Fan's peerless movement skill, it could be said that this move was a sure kill move. However, things did not go as Yi Fan had expected. Swoosh! Just as the ever-flame sword was less than a meter away from the ice serpent's throat, the dozens of white scales on the ice serpent's neck quickly opened up. Dozens of tyrannical white pillars of cold air gushed out from the gaps between the scales and shot straight at Yi Fan. It was actually cold air. Yi Fan, who was below the ice snake's head, did not expect the ice snake to be able to release such cold air. The distance between the man and the snake was only a few meters. The cold air pillar released by the ice snake reached him in the blink of an eye. Yi Fan did not dare to be negligent. He activated the ever-fire sword in his hand to release a 3-meter-wide fireball as he quickly retreated. In fact, the moment Yi Fan unsheathed his ever-fire sword, the ice snake had already sensed the domineering heat emitted by the sword. Ice and fire were originally things that reinforced and restrained each other. One snake and one sword, one cold and one hot, one yin and one yang. The ice serpent was indeed a spiritual being that had cultivated for 1,000 years. When it felt that the divine weapon in Yi Fan's hand was about to stab itself, it immediately activated the 1,000-year ice core in its body and released a domineering chill. In this way, it could protect itself and attack Yi Fan at the same time. It was killing two birds with one stone. Bang, bang, bang. The dozens of cold air pillars collided with the fireball, creating a huge explosion. Chi, chi, chi. The cold air melted and the firepower retreated. The two forces canceled each other out and disappeared in an instant. Yi Fan retreated dozens of meters. He held his sword in one hand and floated in the air, looking at the giant ice snake from afar. The ice snake also sensed that this person was not ordinary. In its 1,000 years of existence, this was the first time it had encountered such a powerful opponent. Both sides were stunned by the other's cultivation. Yifan was a veteran in using cold chi, but he never expected that the snake in front of him would be able to release such a domineering cold chi just by moving its scales a few times. The ice serpent also began to take her opponent seriously. This silver-haired boy looked young, but his skills were exquisite. She had almost succeeded several times, but let him escape several times. Not only that, this person could change from defense to offense in a critical moment. If it wasn't for her cold aura, she definitely wouldn't have been able to withstand that move. Both sides began to take their opponents seriously. The man and the snake looked at each other quietly, neither making the first move. They were all observing each other. The young man at the side was dumbfounded. He was completely shocked by the strength of both sides. The gigantic dragon-like ice serpent, the young man with a high cultivation base, the dazzling battle, the astonishing moves, all of this was something he had never seen before. Just as the young man was intoxicated, the ice snake began to move. It spat out a 3-foot-long blood-red tongue, making a hissing sound. Its huge body began to curl up like an ice mountain. At the same time, Yifan, who was floating in the air, also began to move. As he raised his body again, he began to slowly activate the Everflame sword in his hand. Wong! The Everflame sword let out a cheerful cry, and instantly, a red light burst out as flames rose. The raging flames illuminated Yifan's handsome face. Roar! The ice snake roared again, its voice reaching the heavens. Shua! Yifan, who was high up in the air, swung his sword down, and a 9-foot-long red dragon-shaped flame rushed out of the Everflame sword at high speed, rushing fiercely at the ice snake. Now, his spiritual power was not what it used to be, and his spiritual power was 10 times stronger than before. Now, with a casual attack, the power was several times stronger than before. Whoosh! The dragon-shaped flame raised its head and waved its tail, as the flames rose, shooting in all directions. Looking at the ice snake again, it immediately reacted. Its huge pair of fleshy wings on its neck were fully extended, and its neck was pulled back, ready to attack. At this moment, Yifan's height had far exceeded the ice snake's height. After the fire dragon was released, its speed was extremely fast, and it quickly rushed to the center of the two sides. Roar! The ice serpent suddenly stretched its thick neck forward and opened its huge mouth. A white pillar of cold air, about 10 feet thick and over 100 feet long, instantly rushed out of its mouth, charging straight at the incoming dragon-shaped flame. The speed of the cold air column was fast, and it was not any slower than the fire dragon. Boom! The two great forces, one cold and one hot, instantly intertwined. Water vapor rose, and the flames scattered in all directions. What a strong cold air! Yifan was shocked. It was actually able to resist the fire dragon released by the Everflame sword. Whoosh! Just as Yifan was shocked by the ice snake's cold air column, an even more unbelievable scene occurred. After the fire dragon was dispersed, the ice snake's cold air column did not decrease in speed, and it continued to rush towards Yifan. This cold air column actually penetrated the fire dragon. Yifan was shocked again. He had really underestimated this guy. He had originally thought that he would be able to kill the ice snake with a fire dragon from the flaming sword. However, he had never thought that although the ice snake had yet to take human form, it had cultivated in the extreme north for 1,000 years. Not to mention that its inner core had already taken shape after 1,000 years. Just the fact that it had stayed in the extreme north for 1,000 years meant that the cold chi it had accumulated would not be weak. Coupled with its huge body that was like a giant dragon, it was simply like adding wings to a tiger. Seeing the cold air column coming towards him, Yifan did not dare to be careless. He used 20% of his spiritual power to activate the ever-flame sword in his hand, and then slashed down at the incoming cold air column. Chapter 295. Boom! Red light exploded, and mist rose. The giant snake's frost pillar was instantly shattered by Yi Fan's red light arc. Roar! When the ice snake saw that its frost pillar had been shattered by Yi Fan, it immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. It immediately swept its long snake tail towards the youth who was more than 100 feet away. When it saw that Yi Fan was high up in the air and it did not have the upper hand, it used this move to deal with the youth who was not far away. This move was very clever. It could be said to be a covert move. On the surface, it looked like it was attacking the two youths, but in reality, it was luring Yi Fan down. Boom! The giant snake's tail swept across the ice surface. Its hard as iron white scales sent countless huge ice chunks flying towards the two youths. As the ice snake swept its tail towards the youth, it stared at Yi Fan with its huge red eyes. At this time, the youth was still immersed in an exciting battle and did not notice the giant snake's movements. When he realized that the ice snake was attacking him with its long tail, the ice chunks in the sky had already flown above his head. The youth did not have time to think and immediately laid his body on top of Sakitu. Yi Fan, who was high up in the air, did not expect the ice snake to be so scheming. He thought that the ice snake could not hurt him and had nowhere to vent its anger, so it used the two youths as punching bags. He did not expect that the ice snake had already begun to secretly prepare a killing move. Whoosh! Yi Fan, who was high up in the air, saw that the two youths on the ice surface were in danger. He instantly used his movement technique and disappeared. This youth had indeed been tricked. The ice serpent narrowed its huge eyes, and its tightly shut mouth revealed an imperceptible smile. At this time, Yi Fan had made a low-level mistake. Although his movement technique was as fast as lightning, he forgot that he was still carrying the ever-flame sword, and snakes were naturally sensitive to heat sources, not to mention this 1,000-year-old ice snake. This mistake was very low-level, but it was very fatal. Although the ice snake could not see Yi Fan's powerful movement technique, as long as Yi Fan was carrying the ever-flame sword, it could accurately determine Yi Fan's position. Shua! At the moment Yi Fan disappeared from the sky, the gigantic snake on the ice had already lifted its long tail up into the air, bypassing the ice fog that had splashed up into the air. Whoosh! At the moment when the ice snake swept up the sky full of ice shards, Yi Fan's figure appeared in front of the youth. It was too late for him to save the young man and the unconscious Sakito. In a moment of desperation, he mobilized the spiritual energy in his body. With a single palm, he set up a semicircle of spiritual energy above the three of them. The spiritual chi cover was 30 feet in size and over 9 feet thick, completely enveloping the three of them. Bang, bang, bang. The gigantic ice cubes that filled the sky continuously smashed against the spirit chi barrier, causing loud bangs to ring out. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of ice cubes completely submerged the three of them along with their translucent spirit chi barrier, piling up into a small mountain. Within the spirit chi barrier, Yi Fan turned his head and said to the youth while supporting himself with one hand, "I'll lure the ice snake away. You take Sakitu and leave quickly. Wait for me 5 kilometers away." The youth had already regained his senses by now. He nodded and then carried the unconscious Sakitu by the waist. Yi Fan turned his head and mobilized his spiritual power into his palm. Then, he suddenly exerted force with one hand. Boom! The ice mountain that was tens of thousands of kilograms buried in the spirit chi barrier instantly exploded. Ice cubes flew everywhere, and airwaves spread out. Ice shards filled the sky and fell down. Go! Yi Fan turned around and shouted at the youth. The youth did not say anything. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and immediately rushed out with the scalding Sakitu in his arms. This ice snake was extremely difficult to deal with. If the two of them stayed by his side, he would be distracted. However, just as Yi Fan mobilized his spiritual power into his eyes to see through the ice fog, to see the movement of the ice snake, the scene in front of him instantly made his pupils contract. The ice snake's tail, which was tens of feet long, had already pierced through the ice shards and cold fog and was about to slam down on his head. When Yi Fan saw everything clearly, the ice snake's tail had already touched the hairpin on Yi Fan's head. Boom! The glacier shook, and the snake's tail, which weighed tens of thousands of kilograms, smashed onto Yi Fan's head. Bang! Countless ice cubes were sent flying into the air, hundreds of feet high. The ice snake's move succeeded. Before Yi Fan could react, he had already been tricked by the ice snake who had been planning this for a long time. The ice snake had already known that a small ice mountain would not be able to suppress Yi Fan. Therefore, when Yi Fan used his movement technique to save Sakitu, it had been keeping its tail high in the air, ready to strike. It patiently waited by the side, waiting for the moment when Yi Fan broke out of the ice to give him a fatal blow. Sure enough, Yi Fan did not use much effort to send the ice mountain flying. Although there was a thick layer of ice fog, the ice snake was still able to accurately determine the position of the Everflame sword and gave Yi Fan a fatal blow. The ice snake's attack was extremely powerful. With a tail weighing tens of thousands of kilograms and a height of tens of feet, the strength of this attack was no less than tens of thousands of kilograms. The ice snake's tail instantly created a huge ice trench that was tens of feet wide and hundreds of feet long. Even the youth, who had already rushed hundreds of feet away, was shaken by the ice snake's attack. He fell to the side, his ears ringing. Yi Fan, the youth, who was struggling to get up, looked at the shattered ice behind him and screamed at the top of his lungs. Whoosh! What answered him was the sound of ice cubes smashing into the ice. The youth collapsed to the ground. That youth was probably dead for sure. Hiss! The ice serpent's gigantic body landed back on the ice. Then, it moved its gigantic head to the spot where Yi Fan had been standing just now and carefully examined him. Its blood-red tongue, which was more than 10 meters long, flickered back and forth continuously. It was trying to determine whether Yi Fan was dead or not. On the ice, there was only a hole in the ice. Water bubbled out of it, but there was no corpse of Yi Fan. There was not even a drop of blood. The ice snake narrowed its eyes, revealing an expression of disbelief. It knew the strength of that attack. Even an ice mountain would be shattered in an instant, not to mention a human. Since there was no corpse on the ice, there was only one explanation. This youth had been slapped into the water below the ice. Chapter 296. With a single glance, the ice snake's blood-red pupils instantly shrunk to a point. Under the surface of the water, Yi Fan quietly floated there. His entire body was wrapped in a huge bubble. While the ice snake was looking at Yi Fan with its blood-red pupils, Yi Fan was also looking up at the giant snake. There seemed to be an evil smile on his face. Hiss! This scene caused the ice serpent to raise its head high up in the air. It instinctively retreated 100 feet away and coiled its 1,000-feet-long body into a humongous hill. This was the snake's instinctive reaction when facing an enemy. The ice snake began to feel afraid. It was not afraid because Yi Fan was not dead, nor was it afraid of Yi Fan's evil smile. Instead, it was afraid of Yi Fan's eyes. His eyes were blood red. They were emitting a dazzling red light. The ice snake seemed to feel that something was wrong. For more than 1,000 years, it had been galloping unhindered in the extreme north. It had never met a worthy opponent. Even a powerful three-tailed ice fox had to be courteous to it. But now, it actually felt a trace of fear. Buzz! On the surface of the ice, a dazzling light began to emit. A blood-red light. Gurgle, gurgle. The surface of the ice cave began to violently surge like boiling water. The red light emitted from the cave dyed the clear ice water blood red. Whoosh! 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 Countless rays of red light spewed out from the ice cave and spiraled up into the sky. Gurgle, gurgle on the surface of the water, Yi Fan, with his eyes closed and an evil smile on his face, began to slowly float up. When his feet left the water, his body did not stop and continued to float up into the sky. At this time, his entire body was covered in a red light. Coupled with his silver hair and that evil smile, he was like an evil god descending into the world. When he was 90 zhang above the ground, Yi Fan stopped and floated in the air. The air here isn't bad, and it's quite quiet. It's a good place. As Yi Fan spoke, he slowly opened his eyes that were flashing with red light. He was not dead yet. Dozens of feet away, the youth cried out in surprise. He stood up and rubbed his eyes, as if he couldn't believe that everything in front of him was real. When the ice snake saw Yi Fan's blood-red eyes, it became restless again. Yi Fan looked at the ice snake not far away and said to himself, "Hee, an ice loach was able to beat you to the ground. You really give me face." Roar. When the ice snake heard Yi Fan call an ice loach, it was instantly enraged and roared at the sky. This was the first time in thousands of years that someone had called a loach. Although the ice serpent did not know what the young man had experienced underwater, it was certain that the young man in front of it was not easy to deal with. The one who made the first move had the advantage. After the ice snake roared at the sky, it immediately straightened its huge body and extended it into the air. In the blink of an eye, the 1,000-foot-long snake had already climbed to a height of several hundred feet. You don't know how to fly. Defeating you in the air is not a skill. Yi Fan smiled as he slowly descended back to the ground. The youth not far away was dumbfounded. The huge snake had a natural advantage in terms of size. If he didn't fight with it in the air, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. What made him feel even more incredulous was that Yi Fan did not get into a fighting stance after landing. Instead, he put his hands behind his back and looked up with a smile. He squinted his blood-red eyes and quietly looked at the ice snake in the sky. The ice snake in the sky saw that Yi Fan was looking down on it and was furious. It shrunk its neck back and opened its huge mouth. Wong! A huge ball of light instantly appeared in its huge mouth. The ball of light was 10 feet in size and shone with white light. A few silver lightning bolts swam back and forth on its surface, intertwining and shuttling back and forth. At the same time, the temperature in the air rapidly dropped. The originally clear sky was instantly filled with countless ice crystals. The ice snake had started to use its killing move. Frost Chi? On the ice surface, Yi Fan frowned at first, but then he smiled and began to move his limbs. He swung his arms and kicked his legs, as if he was doing some warm-up exercises. Wong! The white ball of light in the ice snake's mouth grew bigger and bigger. In the blink of an eye, it had grown to 5 feet. The intertwining silver light shone on the ice snake's huge white head, making it sparkle. On the ice surface, Yi Fan did not seem to care about the ball of light in the ice snake's mouth and continued to twist his waist. When the youth in the distance saw this scene, he almost fainted. Had Yi Fan been beaten silly by the ice snake? Why was he like a completely different person from before? What time was it that he was still foolishly doing his morning exercises? Where did his divine weapon that could shoot out flames go? Why didn't he use it? Just when the youth was puzzled, the ice snake started to make its move. It shrunk its neck again and then lowered its head to face Yi Fan on the ice surface and suddenly stretched out its hand. Swish! A thick silver beam of light instantly spun out from the ball of light in the ice snake's huge mouth. Silver lightning bolts twined around the light beam. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.